Elon is clearly smart at something, but I think people want to believe that Elon is smarter at more things than he actually is. Like Elon's like clearly has some sort of weird thing where he can inspire guys that are like him to do things that he wants them to do. And so there's some managerial stuff that he can do sort of well, but he's actually stupider than most people I've ever met because of the things that he believes.
I think he like isn't smart. I don't think he's intelligent, but I think that he is like very cunning. He really believes his own bullshit in a
Yeah.
lot to a level that I think is like delusional, but also like necessary for him to shape reality to his will, and then he does.
Yeah.
But he's not like smart.
Your dig listeners are like gonna hate this, by the way. You always have like serious smart academics on.
Welcome to The Dig, a podcast from Jacobin Magazine. My name is Daniel Denver, and I'm broadcasting from Providence, Rhode Island. You, like me, probably spend a lot of time these days sort of helplessly ruminating over the sick and freakishly evil qualities of Elon Musk and the rest of the tech oligarchs running the MAGA 2.0 regime. Today, I'm interviewing Belden and Liz Franczak, the hosts of the very smart and hilarious podcast TrueAnon, about just that. Before we get started, this podcast is made possible by an economic miracle, which is the thousands of you who support The Dig at patreon.com/thedig. You do so voluntarily, even though we paywall 0 of our episodes. In fact, it's your contributions that make it possible for us to put out every episode paywall free for all to listen to. This is a political education project, and we want everyone possible to listen. Please join in on making that possible by making a contribution now. We will send you our occasional and very excellent newsletter by email, and if you live in the U.S., depending on how much you contribute, we'll send you books, tote bags, coffee mugs. Generous donors elsewhere in the world can receive ebooks. That's patreon.com/thedig. Contribute now. Thanks. And here's Brace Belden and Liz Franczak. Brace organized the first craft brew union in the country with ILWU and was also a soldier with the YPG, the People's Defense Units. Liz, when asked, said she had nothing to add to her bio. Together, Brace and Liz are the hosts of TrueAnon, a very, very good podcast. Brace Belden and Liz Franczak, welcome to The Dig.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
A lot to talk about. How did our tech overlords and their broader milieu become these absolutely freak show MAGA reactionaries? Because Silicon Valley politics used to be synonymous, or seemingly synonymous, with mainstream Democratic Party politics, maybe progressive neoliberalism, and there were always exceptions like Peter Thiel, but by and large, Republicans were always attacking big tech for its purported liberal bias. Was it just tech lords getting beat up after the 2016 election and then having to deal with Lena Khan under Biden? Was that enough to turn these extraordinarily rich, emasculation-anxious, fantasy novel-obsessed dweebs into fascists, or was it the social media that they created that drove them insane, or really does the very premise of my question put things too simply? Was the fascism always there, or at least latent?
I think that I think one way of kind of attacking this question, because I remember it wasn't, I don't know if it was like right after the election or like in the last month, everything's kind of blurred together in this like shock and awe campaign or whatever that we've been living in. But there was this big discussion between, I think it was like maybe it was like Matt Iglesias, who was saying like, oh, they turned to the right because the left didn't pay attention to them or whatever. Do you remember this? This was kind of a big talking point. And I think that one of the things that gets a little confusing when we're talking about Silicon Valley and this documented, I think, rightward shift is that we have to like kind of be very particular about who in Silicon Valley we're talking about, because it becomes a sort of catch-all for just like everyone in the greater Palo Alto area or San Francisco. But I think that there are distinct kind of differences between the VC venture capitalist wing, which would be more where you see the sort of like Thiel's, Mark Anderson, of course, and those guys, versus some of the more kind of classic managerial level, the executive level, especially when you're talking about at publicly traded companies, because they're just like different incentives involved there. And even within the executive class, then there's also some guys that you see like Zuckerberg, right, that are taking a much more outward, like right-wing stance now. And that I think is very similar to a lot of like VC culture, because it's coming from like a founder place, right? Of like, well, I know how things are run. I have all these ideas about how the company should go. And so I think that there's a lot of similarities there, but there still is kind of some distance from the kind of upper management, director, C class at some of these bigger companies, right? So I just want to kind of make that distinction, because I think that sometimes we kind of like lump all of that in, even, and we're not even talking about like people that are like work at the companies, even in like mid-management roles or whatever, or lower down. You mentioned Thiel. I think it's important to mention that Anderson like was always kind of a Republican. I mean, he was a Romney bundler way back when, and
but he like claims that he was like a Democrat. But
of course,
yeah,
of course.
they've all got these things. I mean, I think they kind of just got like sort of quiet about it, especially like you say 2016, where it was like you could not be a Trump supporter, you know, especially in Silicon Valley. You know, Zuckerberg got trotted out, strung up in front of Congress. You know, they stripped him nude and asked him so many tough questions about the Russians or whatever they were asking him. But I think that was a moment where they couldn't really be outwardly, outspoken about even some of the kind of more rote GOP politics that they all kind of naturally share. And I do think that we shouldn't undervalue the effect of some of the organizing and protests that was happening at these tech companies in the wake of the Trump election. Trump won, like whether it was the Google walkouts or the people protesting some of the DoD contracts, or even, I think, as we kind of come to see later on, a lot of the just like internal demands for more diversity in hiring practices, or like internally workers and mid-management asking for more DEI practices within. I mean, a lot of this stuff was coming from inside the house, right? As much as it came top down, a lot of people were asking for it from within. And I think that there was this sense among founders, VCs, higher up execs, that there was like kind of a little revolution on their hands that they didn't know how to deal with, which feels crazy, I think, for us to say looking back at it, because it felt so not revolutionary in spirit, right? But I think it really like freaked them out. And then COVID was just like a kind of mass psychosis event for everyone involved.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it might have been, suffused with sort of like co-opting forms of liberal identity politics and whatnot, but it still felt very imposed upon them, to them. And when like Mark Zuckerberg is telling Joe Rogan about bringing masculine energy back into the workplace, it's about reasserting a certain type of like managerial ownership control, not only economically, but like full spectrum culturally.
Yeah, I mean, I think culturally at the same time, there's also this mythos that's built up around the founder in Silicon Valley. And it's, I think to us on the outside, it looks a little silly, because there's this like idea that they have of themselves as these very masculine figures, as these sort of like little techno king god, figures in their own companies that can do whatever they want. And then there's a little bit of like, anxiety at being like hobbled or castrated by their own employees, these people who are not the builders, these people who are just oftentimes cogs in these very large machines who are able to, hamstring or enlarge this bureaucracy that ultimately slows the corporation down in some way. It's funny because I think a lot of these guys did go totally fucking nuts during COVID. I think that listen, everybody went nuts during COVID. Everybody went fucking crazy. There is no good story that comes out of 2020. I mean, that's how I think of it. But I think combined that going crazy mixed with a bunch of sort of like the lay people getting onboarded onto tech via crypto, and that sort of scene being very taken up by, let's say, some very energetic right-wing personalities, sort of adjacent to a lot of the tech stuff, or in like the case of A16Z, very much in it. I think so much of this combined to just get what we have now, and plus overregulation being made being seen as like the evil kind of capitalist by the Biden administration. And I think this is one thing that these fucking liberals have never gotten right. Well, maybe they do get it right. I don't know. We have different politics. But what they do is they do these half-ass measures where they they start castigating this certain section of capital or like this kind of CEO, but they don't actually do anything about it. They don't throw anybody in jail. There's not a token summary execution or anything like that, like you might have in China. They just kind of lambast them from the various podiums and stuff, and then it causes this big reaction, which is what we saw over and over and over again with the Biden presidency within like the liberal cultural political milieu that existed between 2015 and I guess now. Getting Trump with all these felony charges. It's like you go halfway, but then you cannot take it where it would logically need to go next for you to actually win, because you wouldn't view that as winning.
You piss the hell out of these oligarchs, but you leave their power unchecked. Exactly. It's like when Obama didn't jail a single banker after the Great Recession, but called them fat cats, which infuriated them.
Yeah. And I think these guys are just, frankly, I think they're feeling themselves, like tech has also just, I mean, it's such a broad term, but I think everyone knows what I mean, has been embraced on like a level or integrated into our lives on a level now, more so than it was yesterday, much more so than it was 5 years ago, and like 1,000 times more than it was 10 years ago. And so I think these people see themselves, rightfully so, as controlling large sectors of our communication, our banking system, everything involved in people's lives, entertainment, work. And I think they start to recognize we actually do have this power. Why aren't we using it? And luckily there are a million sort of ready-made sycophantic philosophies that exist in Silicon Valley that many of the listeners of The Dig probably know about, that they can kind of glom onto and use to justify anything that they do. And I think one phrase that keeps coming back to me is this sort of one you hear bounding around the post-rationalist space, which is you can just do things, which is true. You can just do things. But the only people who seem to really recognize that are these people who have immense power and the ability to do basically anything that they want.
At some point, the Magnificent Seven, I'm going to use that as a catchphrase for just the kind of catch-all for a lot of these tech companies that aren't in the Magnificent Seven, but just know that I'm talking about that, have reached a kind of limit in growth. They experience exponential growth from basically the financial crisis on, and at that same time, exponential hand-holding and cultural praise, during the Obama admin, right? They were prized. This is Silicon Valley was a kind of cultural export to the world at that point of America's greatness. And then when you look across the board of all the companies, whether it's Apple, whether it's Microsoft, whether it is Google, they've sort of hit a limit in what their product is, a saturation point, really. There is nothing more to build off of, which is where the kind of AI moonshot really comes in, because I do think they see this as a sort of, in Anderson's words, a sort of final hack. Capital can just sort of generate profit itself on its own through we can automate the process, right? Which is a completely absurd. We don't need to get into the weeds on how absurd that is, but that's the kind of what's fueling a lot of these utopian dreams on these guys' side. And what Brace is saying about the regulations, I think, is really important, because in order for them to achieve or even get close to realizing that, what they see is, well, we've got to like knock down as much red tape as fucking possible, because now we've got to just do it. We've got to just build. We've got to just like invent, like create, like invest infrastructure in order for us to find some sort of like off ramp to continue to generate profit, because all of our technology has hit a saturation point. There is nothing else. Look at what Apple is like hitting a point. You look at all of these companies, everything is just stock buybacks in order to juice stock prices. And we all know those bubbles are continuing to bubble, and that a lot of people have been and are continuing to ring the alarms about that, especially how attached those bubbles are now to major sectors of society globally and also like nationally. And so it's sort of like they had to get more political, because it's like now it's not enough that they have these unicorn companies that have achieved what they've achieved by, you know, getting basically every American to invest in them and put their retirement into their companies, and by that, like, kind of believing in their vision for the future. But also now they have to keep growing, and the only way to do that is to dismantle the state. And so there was like a need for them to actually stop being polite and start getting real. And like literally, like, it's not just lobbying anymore. It's like, no, actually now we need to like mount an assault on the state itself.
What you said about them reaching a limit, and I want to get into the economic limits and AI and Web3 and why AI followed Web3 in the way that it did later on in the interview. But there's also this kind of limit, I think, psychically, where they walk on one hand, they walk around acting like they're Marie Curie or Jonas Salk or Alexander Graham Bell, some sort of, like they are the richest people who've ever lived on Earth because they are genius inventors. But the very same people seem very aware that what they've made is social media engineered around gambling addiction science that's like made everyone miserable and generalized suicidal ideation amongst teenage girls. And I mean, like Peter Thiel, when he says, that famous line, we wanted flying cars, instead we got 140 characters. It's like, but you all got us the 140 characters. That seems to be some kind of like internal conflict. And so becoming like the doers who are actually remaking the state and remaking humanity, it seems like they need that.
Yeah, I was talking to you guys about this last night, but I've been reading through the new Alex Carp book, which is a fucking
page turner.
Snooze. My God. Yes, I am constantly flipping the pages ahead to see how many left. It's dog shit. And the guy he just does this lazy thing where he's like, this philosopher said this, and then like gives 2 paragraphs on it, goes nowhere. And it's like, okay, well, there's a reason a philosopher said that and you didn't, because you're a fucking idiot who just like regurgitates some bullshit you heard and then can't bring it home anywhere or even integrate it into your own fucking ideology. But whatever. I think one thing that he does in the book is he sort of castigates Silicon Valley for like making, he basically regurgitates the same Peter Thiel lines about like, we thought we were going to get all these crazy technological advances, but instead like blah, 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 blah. And like the reality is, the very real reality is that the products that these people have made have caused intense and almost like unknowable amounts of social degeneration and alienation, and they've driven countless people, billions of people probably slightly insane, and then millions very insane. I mean, there's essentially no technological product that I can think of that has been invented in the past 15 years that has improved society in any way. I mean, I'm sure you could point to some fucking medical database that makes it easier to bill me for, my elective, lip fucking filler surgery. I guess it's not surgery, it's just an injection, but you know what I'm talking about there. Like shit like that. But like overall, I think it's very clear that the sort of sane, sober viewpoint in all this is that a lot of the technological advancements that have been made are indisputably a net negative for, not even talking about like my political project or any of my beliefs or anything like that, but just being a normal human being in the world. It has made people complete fucking psychos. And I think that they realize this to an extent, and one thing that these people are good at, and it's, I know we'll talk about Web3, et cetera, later, is pivoting when things seem like they're getting pretty bad, right? And I think that maybe they could see that there really wasn't a lot of new ground to be tread in the old fucking gambling algorithms that they push out on us. I mean, maybe there is. Elon has certainly paved the way in a lot of ways. But I think the focus now, especially, is on hard tech, right? Which really in America means some drone that's going to kill, a family of 3 in Yemen much quicker and easier than one that's piloted by some hopeful suicidal case in a shipping container in Las Vegas. These people, they can still, at the end of the day, even when they're creating something that's like real and physical, all they can do is harm other human beings. They're fundamentally an antisocial class of people. And people wonder, like, at least the Rockefellers or whoever built these big libraries or anything like this. It's these people aren't going to create the big libraries. They're going to create some horrible drone that's going to be able to eat people and spit them out as biofuel. I mean, that will be their monuments to the world.
They may burn down libraries.
They may burn down exactly. I mean, certainly they'll scan all of them and use that to create some sexual AI that can masturbate with you in 500 languages. But these people are like, one thing that I think we really cannot get away from in any of this is these are some of the most antisocial people that I could ever even dream of. And they are in charge of not only the vast majority of social interactions that most people have throughout the day, but huge parts of our political, our social, our cultural space to begin with. And so we're a society that is kind of guided in many ways by people who are at their core hate or can't understand or have bad feelings towards other people who look down on them. And so it's a paternal sort of structure, but the pater at the top of it is just like the creepy guy in the back of the class during high school who, you would avoid.
Right. I mean, I usually hate it when people say something like, let's put politics to the side. But
yeah,
like you suggested, Brace, let's put politics to the side, just like the way most humans were raised, and think about the qualities that are portrayed or described as good qualities humans can have. And these people just have brazenly the opposite, the worst, most anti-human, antisocial qualities.
Yeah. And I think there's something to them glomming on to the Trump stuff, because I do think that they recognize on some level that there is no horizon for liberalism. Well, I guess it really depends on what you mean by liberalism, but there is a story with the Trump stuff and with the kind of, I mean, it's a cobbled together story. It's a story that isn't exactly clear in a lot of its boundaries or where it's really going, but it is a narrative. And it is I think there is something that about the turn to patriotism from a lot of these people that, first of all, rings false, because no disrespect, but these are the most globalist motherfuckers I could ever even imagine. But I think that they were smart to grab onto that.
I'm Naomi Klein, and you're listening to The Dig, my go-to podcast for the most thoughtful, in-depth conversation on the left. It's an incredible place to be exposed to new ideas and new writing. And if you can, please become a sustaining supporter at Patreon.
This episode is brought to you by our listeners who support us at patreon.com, and by The Syllabus, a nonprofit knowledge discovery service founded by friend of the pod, Yevgeny Morozov. The Syllabus is doing artisanal automation. How does that work? Well, they use technology to monitor thousands of sources, and each week, human creators, that is, actual people, handpick the best of what's been published on the internet. When you sign up, you'll begin crafting your custom feed, picking from 6 languages and 60 topics, like far-right populism or energy and extractivism, heterodox economics, or AI and automation. Everything is there. Each Monday, you'll get a new batch of personalized recommendations of essays and books, academic articles and reports, videos, and even, yes, podcasts. I highly recommend that Dig listeners check out The Syllabus. Visit their website at the-syllabus.com. That's the-syllabus.com. They offer 2-week free trials, and if you enter DIG at checkout, you'll get 30% off your first year.
Liz, what about Musk? You started the interview by saying we really need to be careful about telling a super generalized story about Silicon Valley, because there are a lot of particular sorts of people there, and even amongst the tech oligarchy, a lot of people who are freakish in very particular ways and sort of for particular reasons. And you said that Musk was radicalized in a very particular way that could only be accomplished by his own website.
I know. I do think that. Like, I feel like there's something really almost banal about his radicalization, and yet he is sort of such an exceptional figure that he was able to, similar to what he did with Tesla in a lot of ways and with SpaceX as well, like somehow like manipulate the situation and use it reflexively to his advantage. But it's funny, like, so I mean, I think of him as wholly and fully a subject of X, the everything app. There was like Elon before COVID and even before 2022, and then now he is just like this other thing. And I don't know how else to describe it. I see him as this just like human slop machine, like slop, not slot machine, but I guess they're sort of related in some ways. But that he is, Brace, you said like an AI, this like recursive loop that, you know, when an AI starts to ingest itself, you know, theoretically that leads to collapse. But I don't know if we'll get that lucky with Elon.
Well, he said it. He said, "I am become meme."
Yeah, like how fucking disturbing is that? Sorry, swearing, but like how disturbing is that? I don't know. I mean, I think that like thinking back on him, I think that I keep saying that it's underappreciated, but I actually do really think this is a really like basic statement, but bear with me that I think it's underappreciated how much Twitter, before we're talking about X, has changed politics in this country and then later on in the world. You can compare it a little bit to what talk radio did in the 90s in terms of it inflating or like inflating, but like a cyst or something, the like kind of civil society. Like when you think about how people come into a petition, organize, try to speak to or get something from the state. We have, because of the kind of information ecosystem, we have sort of like direct to consumer politics now, right? Where this sort of, all of these social media platforms have cut the cord, as it were, like, or sort of short circuited things, where there's now just like a fucking direct pipeline from someone on a social media website to a politician. Whereas before that, there was a lot of intermediaries, right?
Civic organizations,
of course. Remember those?
Whether we're talking about Kiwanis Club or labor unions, like either one.
Absolutely. And all of that has now been sort of scuttled into this matrix of social media online. And you see it in, everyone is an avatar, whether it's, the ACLU or it's Joe Biden or it's me or it's a bot in India. Like, and it's all been kind of flattened on this thing, right? And so it's really like anarchic, but at the same time socially produced and reflexive, but unorganized. And it's also competitive because people are all kind of on there trying to get attention, right? And competing for attention, whether that's jobs or whether that's like social attention in different kind of milieus, whether that's even public facing or whether that's behind the scenes in group chats where a lot of sort of nascent organizing happens, even if we don't want to call it that, right? But we see the product of it now when we see the kind of right-wing vanguard, which absolutely, you want to tell me that JD Vance wasn't on his fucking like alt account talking to Groypers or whatever? We know he was. Well, we don't know he was, but I will say I suspect he was.
We know he was. Dig listeners in your heart. You know he was.
They know.
And, so I think that like all of this was very new beginning in 2014, 2013, up into like 2016, and then kind of got supercharged a little bit, mostly on the left, to be honest, like in the run up to Bernie, right? And then we hit 2020 and people are disillusioned from the Bernie collapse. We've got COVID. There's also a mass onboarding event for everyone getting online, where like suddenly now, because of COVID, it's not just us early adopters who are hanging out on the internet. It's literally like my parents, and everyone is not tuning into MSNBC or whatever. They're on Twitter trying to figure out what the fuck is going on with the COVID-19, get the facts, you know, whatever. And so when we talk about mass onboarding events, like it was, and it also produced an excess of information. And I think that that's like something that's sort of crucial to remember, which is that like in this economy, information is a commodity, which means that it's also subjected to, you know, the effects of being a commodity, which is like overproduction. You produce an excess of information and suddenly it has psychic and other kinds of effects like schizophrenia, like mass psychosis, like everyone kind of fucking losing it, coupled with all of the like market dynamics on the internet. I promise I'm going to get to Elon, because I think in this moment of like 2020 when he's going online, and clearly, you know, and he has even said some of this had to do with his daughter, right, transitioning, that plus the state coming in and shutting down the Tesla factories in California. All of this seemed to sort of like cohere or happen around the same time and sort of like freak him out enough that whatever other kind of social milieus he was getting into, whatever other kind of media he was consuming, he sort of began, and I'll repeat myself, a sort of like banal radicalization. Whereas like if it had happened in like 2015 or maybe he went QAnon then. You know what I mean? But like at this point, there was like different pathways being carved out, you know? And in his right-wing radicalization, all of these sort of dynamics on social media were already kind of quickening, you know, like the pace of all of this stuff was picking up, and a lot of disaffected, what we then kind of called post-left kind of ecosystems were popping up to criticize a lot of mainstream liberal, especially Biden administration reaction to COVID stuff. You know, and this started to shape a whole new influence world online that Elon kind of steps into. And when he buys Twitter and turns it into X, the everything app, he does what he did with Tesla, which is put it on ludicrous mode, like he calls it, strip away literally all the guardrail, like what he knows to do with the company, right? Which is like move fast, break things. Yes, everyone says, but also like literally just like no rules. Rules are for suckers, so I'm just going to do what I want, and we're going to push all of the levers, like, I don't know what the video game, what do you call it with video games, where you make some, you go to the highest power?
I'm sorry, Liz, but your knowledge of video games is so low that you can't even begin to describe
I don't know what
you're talking about.
Mine is going to be even lower than Liz's,
when you make
I'm
the
afraid.
character
God mode. Okay, all right. I thought you meant to make like Mario jump really high.
Is that what Musk was paying the guy to do for him on that?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. But it's like he did that with X, right? He turned Twitter to X, and by doing that, he took all of like whatever made Twitter what it was at that point. He stripped it away, put it on God mode, and like speed up and quicken this like radicalization pipeline and social organizing craziness that was already there and working, and would just like put it on overdrive. And then because he is like literally the X power user, it was like a reflexive process. And so he himself became even more sort of like the AI ingesting the material and then that actually changing the content of the AI as it's doing that, right? Like it was the same for him. And so it's at one point a completely recognizable story of online radicalization, right? It's like, you know, it's the Jan 6 guys, except it's Elon, and now he's literally has an office in the Oval Office, right? Or in the White House. Like, so on the one hand, it's completely understandable. And on another, it's like totally unprecedented because of the level of access and because of how the speed and the scale at which he's done this.
There's so much there, and one thing that jumps out is just like that his radicalization was around transgender, socialism, COVID lockdowns. That's like really the unholy trinity on some level, driving the entire post-2020 far-right revival.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also notable that like those are, and a few other things as well, are sort of the things that like get a lot of viral hits on Twitter. A lot of people, and I think a lot more people than many would feel comfortable with, have sort of gotten a lot of their politics from watching cringe compilations, right? Or like Ben Shapiro owning, 19-year-old they them student or whatever the fuck. I think Liz is kind of right to call it banal because like Musk, I think people call him a Nazi, which, fair enough. What am I going to argue with them? But like, I don't even know. I don't think I would necessarily call it that because it's like this dumber thing that exists now when all the barriers have been broken down and like history has been flattened and nothing really means anything. It's like, okay, like people wonder, how can somebody be like be a Nazi but also have fealty to Israel or whatever? None of that matters right now. Like that actually is like the wrong way to look at it because hypocrisy now is just almost been made obsolete in many ways by the way that many people use the internet. And this happens on the left too. You'll see somebody who professes in many ways a sort of hodgepodge of social democratic views and then this maximalist like ultra left view on this issue or that issue, and you wonder how did they get there, and it's like, oh, because you have learned politics through memes or something like that. And that's the same way with Musk. I think Musk has sort of this cobbled together extreme right ideology that is a pretty perfect reflection of how a lot of people on the right have kind of gotten their politics, which is through like cringe compilation videos, through Ian Miles Chong tweets, through like various botnets run from India that like make money off of engagements by posting videos of black people doing whatever and talking about crime rates and all that kind of shit. Like Elon is almost perfect as like both the owner and the subject of this website. And one can't even accuse him of hypocrisy because many of the social evils that social media inflicts upon people, he himself is a test subject for, and he himself has been affected by in all of these crazy ways. So when he says something, wearing a t-shirt that said like, this is a side quest for me, he gets up at, in his ketamine haze at the CPAC stage and says, I am, become meme. That like, I can't do the accent, but I'm going to get there someday. He's actually right. And like, and I think that's something that is very difficult for what you might call regular people to wrap their heads around, to somebody who just swims in this sea of shit. And, you wouldn't want to dip your toe in there. You wouldn't want to swim around in that. But like for him, he can, and it works. It's something that's fucking scary because I think it really is like he is a particularly egregious case and a very powerful case. But people are like this all over now, man.
Yeah. Yeah, the like incoherent ideology point I think is so important because I do think that politicization that happens it's on social media, on Discord, whatever these social kind of different social websites are that where people kind of get these new ideas about things is that it isn't coherent ideology that's being presented, and that they're kind of like all reacting to the like news of the day, and then based on social circles, social incentives, a kind of like, like you say, like meme ideology, but it's sort of kind of a short-term hodgepodge intellectual memory that is then sort of wired through or like made sense of through like a matrix of personal grudges that are all sort of like historically determined, you know what I mean? And so like, and that's the only way to kind of understand a lot of these people's what they call politics. And so when you try to point out hypocrisy, or when you try to point out like you say that like, oh, you can't, how can you be a Zionist and think that, or whatever, like creating a politics through this like consumerist market of ideology and information basically like makes us all that no matter what. And it will change and it will shift based on whatever like tomorrow's news is, and the day after that, and the day after that, which is why I think it's easy for people to say like, I know this from people that I know in my I almost just said in my real life as if that's not what, and now we're talking so much about the internet. But like, I think you hear this a lot, especially from older people who are like, disillusioned from the Democratic Party or whatever, or they say the left or whatever, right? And they say, well, my politics hasn't changed. It was the left that did, or whatever. And when you're on this sort of lazy river of like social media kind of molded pop meme ideology, that's like a coherent thing for you to think, because you're like, yeah, no, I have just been kind of like on this lazy river doing my thing. It's everything else that I'm reacting to. And yet all of these other forces are at play that I think still, even today, we don't do enough work trying to kind of unpack.
Liz, in terms of the material basis for all of this, or really maybe more sort of like the dematerialized, financialized material basis for this, you were talking about Musk going ludicrous mode on his companies and now going ludicrous mode on the administrative state. If Twitter had been a normal company, whatever that means, if tech had been a normal industry, wouldn't he have just fucked up so badly that it would have just crashed and he would have lost all his money? Because, of course, tech is not a normal industry. Tesla has the most insane PE ratio in world history. They portray themselves and are portrayed by their sycophants as these business geniuses, but would his approach have worked if he wasn't existing in this massively distorted bubble that gives Tesla a market cap overinflated, I think, to like right now nearly 1 trillion as of November, a market cap that was the size of the next 16 largest car companies combined? Can all these people be going insane in the way that they are and making us all insane in the way that we are all becoming insane without the context of that bubble?
I mean, I think that they're as much a product of that bubble as they are also continuing to hijack it and actively shape it as we move forward. So I think that like the only way you can understand Tesla's, I mean, that you rightfully call an overvaluation, right? You go back and like, you know, Elon was able to kind of build the reputation of that company, not on the cars, right? But on these kind of like accounting magic and taking advantage of credits that he bought and sold. And that was a program started by like basically like, you know, with some good intention, like environmentalists trying to push, you know, green tech adoption in the car industry.
This is Obama era.
Yeah, totally. And in California, right? Like good liberal California. And so like back then with Tesla too, like the other car companies, you know, Ford and the like, they understood that they couldn't get their customers like to buy energy efficient vehicles. And it like the tech just really wasn't there yet. And so they would get dinged by the federal government for not producing or not meeting quotas for that kind of technology. And so to get around that, they would buy and sell those credits from Tesla, right?
But the big three just wanted to make SUVs.
Well, yes, but they wanted to sell the cars, and they didn't believe the tech was there yet, which may have been the case. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a car maker. But now China says otherwise, which, you know, BYD, that's who Tesla should be worried about, right? But the American car manufacturers saw Tesla as a loss leader for the industry. And so Tesla served a really important role in that, which is kind of part of the story of the, you know, evolution of green tech and the adoption of green tech. So we couldn't have gotten to where we are without Tesla sort of absorbing those losses on the big manufacturers' books. But that in turn also helped push this PR push that Tesla was this kind of Iron Man type company and that he was a sort of like Tony Stark, you know, back in, that's like the Obama era Elon image, you know? And so it's all kind of, it's not so much that he is this like singular genius who just hijacked everything. I mean, he is and he isn't, right? He's this like, he's a product and also someone who is exploiting friction in the sort of economy in America, and especially in, you know, the industrial economy of America, that he's able to, you know, take advantage of. And then, yeah, you know, really, I think have some foresight to see, like, as a good con man, like, how much can I push this, you know? And he saw the same thing with Bitcoin. Like, I hate fucking giving him credit for this shit, right? But like Tesla, you know, if it weren't for their Bitcoin holdings, their net income would have been down like 78% year over year, right? So they're able to, through the magic of accounting, which in my opinion is occult magic, they were able to cover that big profit hole by, this like 600 mark to market gain because Bitcoin shot up to $100,000 a Bitcoin. You know what I mean? So like and then you have to understand that then all of his efforts and his buddies' efforts behind Doggy and Doggy Coin and Bitcoin and producing all of that then has these knockoff effects of being very important then to his bottom line with Tesla. So like all of these like terrible things that we hate are also all kind of part of the big Tesla monster, in my opinion, which, yes, you're correct to say is like not a car company, but a stock company. The cars serve the stock price, not the other way around. And he really did, if he didn't intend to build it that way, he certainly realized it at some point and pushed it as far as he could.
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is really exemplary of the whole tech economy in the sense that like Bitcoin crypto, it represents nothing. There's no underlying use. And while other tech companies, there are underlying uses. There's hardware, there's software, there's social media, and as useful or unuseful as those uses might be, there's something there. And yet the market caps are so out of control that that's almost irrelevant. There's something else entirely going on.
I mean, I think that's a good point in that, like, we really just have to accept that, like, large parts of society are completely unmoored from what we might think of as, like, natural, or not natural maybe, but, like, historic rules that things have generally abided by. I think there is a great temptation to sort of slot things. I mean, obviously one must always look for historical parallels to try to figure out where things might go or to just it's useful. But in this case, I think there's like a great unmooring of reality that's been occurring for a long time. And I think that we're getting further and further away from the way things used to be, whatever that might mean. And I think the tech sector is like both behind a lot of this and really exemplary of a lot of this. I mean, most of these products are worth basically nothing. They produce nothing. They a lot of them aren't even profitable, but they're still valued at these extraordinary, princely sums. And they need to be, because now a lot of the economy, and this isn't just because of tech, this has been the case for a number of decades, is just exists. It's sort of like Liz said, like this occultic practice of accounting that isn't actually connected to anything. And that's just the way it is until it isn't, right? Like, I mean, something either happens or it doesn't, or it goes into like whatever phase of this is next. I can't imagine that we'll get through this, whatever this all is, but I think people know what I mean, completely unscathed. I think that something is going to happen, as vague as that might be. And you can always be right if you say something like that. But I really, truly do believe that this can't last, right? Like we are in a house made of nothing, built on a foundation of nothing. And eventually something, the Grim Reaper is going to kneel his black camel at the door and walk inside and see that there's nothing even to kill. And the whole thing comes tumbling down. And it is just, I don't know. It is extraordinary to me that like as scientifically, I mean, God, Renaissance guys, if they are looking down from heaven, which is real, on us right now, they must be like, this is fucking crazy, because like we are supposedly in like the most scientifically advanced age, which should really go hand in hand with like a sort of rationalism that people at the beginning of the early 20th century thought that like humanity would begin to embody more and more as we go away from like the superstitions of Christianity or whatever. It turns out now that like essentially people live in and companies live and whole economies and countries live in these massive delusions that make the sort of most pious, Christian fiefdom of the 14th century look like the pinnacle of scientific progress.
Yeah, it turns out that every document of civilization also document of barbarism.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we're living in a fucking freak show right now, Dan.
I mean, I think these guys know that, though. What you're saying about like the music, everyone's just waiting for the music to stop, but no one. It's like everyone's too afraid to call top, basically, Mm-hmm. And it's like you see it in the way they're acting, which is like, it's like a fucking fire sale. You know what I mean? Like where it's like, how much of this can we privatize, strip away, like on such a different level than we saw this isn't like Reaganism. This isn't even Paul Ryanism. You know what I mean? Like, even the Heritage Foundation, like, you know, they've always been totally kooky, but a lot of the stuff that they're pushing now, you're like, whoa, this feels like, when did the Heritage Foundation go like ANCAP? You know what I mean? By being like, now what we need is, you know, network states, right? And you're just sort of like, how did this all happen so fucking fast? I feel like it was just like, you know, 4 years ago, we're reading about, you know, some of these guys in Silicon Valley, Patrick Friedman, like all these kind of like, and now they're like the main characters of the direction for the American state. You know, they were always sort of in the wings or like in the kind of like in the margins, at least, you know, even with all of their money, right? Someone like Patrick Friedman being the fucking like with some of the most money, oldest money, and yet still being kind of in the margins is like the weird sort of like freaky Burning Man guy that just wants everyone to like live in a boat state, you know, or live out on the freedom of the seas, which really means like, you know, we need to get in on this coup in Honduras and like totally like hijack that
and make some zones happen.
Make some zones happen. Yeah, let's get some Hong Kong up in here in San Francisco. But like, it does feel like they are now fully and totally pushing the pedal to the metal and like just actually literally doing that, you know? And I don't mean to like be kind of like doomer or whatever, but I do genuinely feel like there's not a lot for us to do except kind of sit back and watch.
I want to get into this ideological stew that we've been discussing in a little more detail. And I want to start by taking a closer look at two scary things that I've heard tech oligarchs say recently. First,
ghosts are real. That's about the scariest thing I could ever say. If one of them came out and said on TV that ghosts are real and that they're everywhere, and it's like, oh, but you have to be special and you can see them, I would freak the fuck out.
They came out about didn't Tucker Carlson have his whole like demon arc?
Oh God, yeah. Tucker Carlson believes UFOs are demons, and that,
I
but
was
they're also
visited by
angels.
a spirit in the desert once. It was
You
scary.
were?
Really?
Yeah, I was in the middle of the New Mexico desert in a house by myself in the middle of nowhere that was owned by like a friend's parents. And it was like 15 years ago. I pulled up in the middle of the night, like just like desert New Mexico night. I pour myself a little whiskey. I get a book. I'm reading it by a lamp. And then suddenly over my shoulder, I hear a tapping sound on the window. And there's a bat flying against the window rhythmically. Boom, boom, boom. And then suddenly a black cat jumps out of the night, leaps out of the night, grabs the bat in its mouth, and disappears back into the darkness.
No way.
So
Dan,
scary.
what the fuck?
Oh my
That was
God.
so scary.
Are you fucking serious?
That happened to me.
What
I
did you
had that
do? But
experience.
what happened next?
I
Did
drank
you just
more
like
whiskey.
disassociate?
I disassociated and drank alcohol.
Yeah.
That's the craziest thing I've heard in my entire life.
But see, that makes me think like that's like, oh yeah, we live in a multiverse and this is not the only reality and we are being fucked with like things. That's
you
like
gotta-
way too poetic.
You
That's
gotta
incredible.
write that up for Jacobin's spirituality imprint that they're,
Ooh,
they're
yes.
launching next year.
You guys need a California spiritual imprint. I love that.
Yeah,
to kind of preempt the pastel Q stuff. So the two scary things that I heard tech oligarchs say recently, Sam Altman of OpenAI said that AI advances may require, quote, changes to the social contract. The entire structure of society will be up for debate and reconfiguration. And then Peter Thiel was comparing present day United States of America to 1920s Germany and said, quote, liberalism is exhausted. Democracy, whatever that is exhausted. So we have to start talking far outside the Overton window. So when they're saying things like that, what are they talking about? What sort of ideologies are informing them? Quinn Slobodian, in his recent piece in the NYRB, described Doge as, quote, the convergence of three strains of politics that have never simultaneously been this proximate to power. Those projects come from different but related places. the Wall Street Silicon Valley nexus of distressed debt and startup culture, anti-New Deal conservative think tanks, and the extremely online world of anarcho-capitalism and right-wing accelerationism. Do you agree with that assessment? And like, how can we make sense of these sort of terrifying pronouncements from some of the richest people who've ever walked the earth?
Listen, I like Quinn Slobodian. I think of him as a colleague because he's also gone on this podcast, but I think that he's missing a couple kind of crucial things there. I think I've come to believe now over the years, and I didn't always think this way, but I kind of come to believe now that, and I think a lot of people, the average thinking person might realize that like libertarianism is basically a fake ideology. It means nothing, right? It means whatever you want it to mean in the instant. And so in that way, I think it's very perfect for a lot of the tech people to sort of take on, because you can pick it up and drop it at will as the situation demands. And so I think there is a certain type of like situational libertarianism that these people employ sometimes and then drop when it's convenient to them. But I think that there is I think that there's a new outlook on the state that a lot of these people have, which isn't, I'm not really sure I know the entire contours around yet. I do appreciate, and I think that like recently a lot of these scary statements that they've been making, I actually really appreciate them because I feel like we're finally getting some honesty from these quarters, or honesty from some capitalists to begin with. Because I think in these people's lack of social graces, they oftentimes do have the good fortune for us, misfortune for them maybe, of being, pretty honest about what they want. And I think that, if there is something to be cobbled together from the pronouncement that these people make, I think it really is that like they want a future that is both like at the same time libertarian and highly authoritarian in ways that like I don't think that a society has really experienced yet because of technological limitations. And one might say like, oh well, how are you really how is Peter Thiel a libertarian, and self-professed like extreme libertarian in some ways, person who is so enmeshed in these companies like Palantir that all they do is basically surveil people. Well, that doesn't matter, right? Like it doesn't matter because libertarianism is useful for him sometimes and it's not useful for him at other times. And I think reading between the lines on all of these kind of scary pronouncements that these people make, that is really what we're getting out here. A syncretism that like actually doesn't need to ever be synthesized. It can all exist as these discrete parts within the whole. And if it doesn't make sense, then too fucking bad. Like cry more, lib. That's what that's sort of the reaction you'll get. It doesn't have to make sense because it still can work in some ways. There can be liberty here and there can be, highly authoritarian things here, which is in actuality like the reality of liberal democracy and capitalism, right? There is liberty in capitalism. Well, granted, it's liberty to do certain things. It's liberty to own property if you can afford it. It's not the liberty to not starve if you can't.
Or to not be in the largest prison system that's ever been constructed in human history.
Precisely. And so and I think in many ways, like these people, yeah, they might be totally nonsensical if you take them at face value on each statement discreetly and then compare it discreetly to another statement. But if you take it all as a whole, it does make a sick sort of nonsense sense, if that makes sense. I'm using the word sense a lot in a sentence, but you guys know what I'm talking about there. And so I think that really like, I like that Sam Altman said that. It's true what he said. I noticed a lot of people earlier today freaking out that Jeff Bezos is going to come in the Washington Post editorial section and make it, more amenable to free market capitalism. I can't remember what the other thing was, but like
personal liberty and markets. Or personal freedom in markets.
Yes. Yeah.
What happens when those come into conflict? What is the op-ed page going to do? How are they going to square that circle?
They can't possibly.
Liz, there's no domination in the private sphere. Only the state can dominate people, and then there are a number of exceptions.
Yeah. There's tort law for everything else.
And I'm happy to see Bezos taking back control of the Washington Post editorial section from the Red Guards who had been occupying the offices for the past 5 years. But the reality is when people complain about things like that happening, or even when people complain about these tech people saying stuff like this, I understand, critiquing it and taking it seriously. But when people are like, I can't believe he would say something like that. Oh, that's so fucked up that he would say something like that. I'm glad he says something like that. I'm glad Bezos takes control because no more of this like bullshit, and I will say social peace that has partially been enforced by people on the so-called left of pretending that like, there is some sort of limits to these people, or that like they have to be polite, or they have to, we actually, like the Washington Post thing, for instance. Like, I am glad that the capitalist newspaper has capitalist op-eds in it. I don't want to confuse people by that anymore, by having some vague social democratic columnist or whatever. And nobody fucking reads the Washington Post opinion section, so I have no idea what exactly, even if I'm being honest here. I'm surprised that they've strayed from free market fundamentalism. But like, with people like Altman or any of these people saying anything scary, it's good that they say it, because at least it kind of takes away some of the bullshit that I think people would like to believe, that these people aren't as acting in their interests.
Yeah. I think too, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking, I'm going to say something that I don't think I 100% believe, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's being recorded, so why not?
It's just the three of us.
You think that black cat that ate the bat was Loki, the trickster god?
Probably. Likely.
Or if it just took it away.
Could have just carried it away.
What if they were just friends?
It ate the bat.
What, maybe it saved the bat from self-harm. No, I'm going to say something that I don't know if I fully believe 100%, but yet I think I do, which is that I think that the American system, which is the sort of like what I guess we would call like neoliberal system in the post-Nixon high period of Reagan Thatcher moment, and then through the 90s, 2000s, right? But more so prior to that, right? But the kind of like, if we understand the American state as this like neoliberal state, like I think that it has kind of exhausted itself in a similar way that the 19th century classical liberal state did, and is facing a lot of internal contradictions that it cannot reconcile. And in that moment, we're seeing a lot of actors taking advantage of these sort of like crisis points and kind of jockeying for how they can take advantage of the situation and push through their own ideology, or get themselves a good seat at the table for whatever is going to come next. And I don't know if that's like fully articulated or understood yet, but I do think that like, when you read between the lines of these guys, whether it is Thiel, less so Thiel, because I'm actually like very unimpressed by, every time it's so much better to read him than to watch him speak, because it's like totally demystifies the entire thing. Or so maybe it's better to watch him speak, because it is all these guys, him, Anderson, Musk, you're like, you do better in the written form. Crazy enough. Yeah. Like, do
Musk
not
do
speak
so
publicly.
Not articulate guys.
No, it's and I'm like constantly being like I don't know, saying words like backwards somehow in like, putting my mouth in shapes that, no other human being knows how to do. Anyway, but when you kind of read between the lines of like what a lot of these guys are saying, especially someone like Curtis Yarvin mentions Wolbug, but even all the way to like Matt Iglesias, who is kind of the like centrist liberal guy who I think understands some of these things and is searching for these kind of bailout answers for how to like propel the American system forward in his own kind of lane. What they're reaching for is basically, in my opinion, is the Chinese state. What they see is, whether they can articulate it or not, what they want is something that can be organized and exist above constitutional limits. And that is kind of how the Chinese state is organized, not dissimilar to the Soviet Union in some respects, and before that, not dissimilar to a monarchy in some sense, right? Which is that sovereignty is sort of split. You have the organs of the state, which is seen through the Constituent Assembly, or is like limited through the Constitution, and yet the party exists above the state. It can dispense with the Constitution at will. It can reshape those as it needs to, because it is the kind of guiding force and lives above and beyond the kind of physical form of the state. And I think that everyone is kind of reaching for this. But the American system, because it is built off its liberal democratic institutions, which are there, especially legally speaking and through the law, there to construct markets that it safeguards through public-private partnerships with the state is unable to kind of meet the moment, structurally speaking, right?
Even though those relationships fueled the rise of all these people in the first place.
Of course.
Yeah.
We're always seeding our own destruction.
But hypocrisy we dispensed with that years ago. We don't need it anymore.
And so, you see these guys, I mean, in my head, it's like I can almost see a way in which what they're trying to do is strip away the red tape that would stop them from organizing this sort of new system that could be almost like a funhouse mirror of the Chinese state, even if they don't realize that in the first place. Like, you read someone like Adrian Vermeulen, who is very much a kind of legal architect of this kind of like attack on the administration.
The Harvard law integralist.
Yeah, the Catholic and the former partner of Cass Sunstein. I always call him Susstein. Sunstein. But yeah, no, I mean, you read through his work and, you know, he, much more than the kind of guys that were typical at the Heritage Fund. I mean, Big Con has always worked its attacks on abortion rights, for example, through the lower courts, right? And it has a very like kind of bureaucratic like system set up to test all of this stuff at the low courts and then work it through precedent and like and like over the decades it's organized this big assault.
The Long March.
Yeah, absolutely. And these guys very much are not doing any of that, right? This is very new, which is no, we're actually going to attack the administrative state at the highest level, pushing the theory of the unitary executive as far as we can, right? Because the kind of precedent is already there, of course, from Reagan, from Bush 1, from Clinton, from Bush 2 to Obama. We all know the story, right? Like that has been a general trend of strengthening the executive, but also going back to like, well, what did Lincoln do? What did FDR do? When FDR, remade the state, and was able to push through all of these sort of like big institutions, these big social democratic institutions. How did they sort of use the law to their benefit in order to accomplish all of that, right? None of this is actually very unique. I mean, I would think, look, if I wanted to get something done in Washington, like that's kind of what I would look at. So like I understand, right? If you're like, I want to do something, wouldn't you be like, well, let me look at the guys who have done something? But like when you kind of read between the lines of what they're kind of envisioning for how they see power, stripping away this, Moldbug is always talking about, all of these guys in the bureaucracy, they don't answer to anybody. And like, oh, the big American Leviathan bureaucracy, and it doesn't do anything. We need to be efficient and da-da-da-da-da. And what they're actually talking about is like the form of the party, like that's what I can see in that. Even if they don't, like that's what it feels like they're reaching for, because that is the effective system that is governing. I mean, look at what China has done. I know it's like a joke. I always say I'm becoming a China guy, but when you see, like, we're talking about Tesla, look at BYD, right? Look at how they have streamlined every step of the process for manufacturing, for every step of the supply chain, and have completely dominated the market to the shock of like American executives. They went over there and they couldn't believe what they saw. I mean, it was almost like cinematic, comical, it's like, what, you guys weren't paying attention? And there's obviously like weird Western ideas and like about all of that stuff that's baked into that. But this was accomplished because of the stewardship of the state, of the Chinese state, right? Which is it's not liberal democratic, but in China, it's like, it's a much different relationship. And the state is as important to the firms gaining a hold in the marketplace, and especially the global marketplace, because they require a lot of the diplomatic maneuvering of the state, who is battling the Americans, who's trying to cut them out at every like hole in the market. And so what I'm saying is that like in this moment, I mean, I feel like the American system is kind of collapsing under its own weight, and it cannot carry us through to this next stage in human development. And so whether they understand it or not, the sort of assault on the state that's happening now, I think, is being done because people are sort of desperate to figure out a solution, and they're not really, we're sort of all out of ideas.
I mean, if I can just add one thing, I think that's a really important point about the funhouse mirror of the Chinese, right? And I think a lot of these people have recognized Thiel and, but a lot of these guys, not Elon, curiously enough, but China is the main competitor and pretty much the only real competitor to the U.S. And there is, I think, an unconscious and in some parts very conscious understanding that like the U.S. system is, I mean, these people are right in many ways. We do have a huge bureaucracy. There are like tons of bizarre and arcane and unnecessary regulations that are basically not accountable to a liberal democratic system. Do I care for the most part? No, I do not. But they exist. And I think that what is being sought here, even if it's unconsciously, although I think in large parts it is conscious, is an American answer to the Chinese century, right? And it is sort of like a reshoring and a rebooting of the American system to make it actually competitive with China. And I think what we're seeing now is just the beginning of a total restructure. And you talk about the unitary executive and Adrian Vermeer, whatever the fuck his last name is.
I think it's Vermeulen.
I know, I could never say it.
Yeah, well, can't read. Eventually I'll be reading on a fucking, on a very shoddily put together grave in a very large graveyard. Natural causes, of course. But I think with a lot of these people, it's interesting. They talk about, and you always see Moldbug go back to this. He talks about, you liberals don't like some of our ideas. Well, FDR enlarged the executive. Well, a lot of the reason that FDR had to enlarge the executive and enforce his, what was at the time called semi-fascist rule, was because of the threat of large-scale social unrest that was caused by the Great Depression. And the models at that point for dealing with something like that lay in the regime of Mussolini, but also in the Soviet Union, which famously also had a fairly large executive. And not to say that I'm anti-New Deal. New Deal, well, I guess I could make a case against the New Deal, but only from like a sort of theoretical communist one, not really against. I'm glad that they built some bridges and dams some places. But I think I can kind of see that now happening with China. Is we need a lean system, an American streamlined, sexy, smooth, like a fucking one of those old, science fiction cars from the 1950s,
or a doll with no parts.
Yeah, to compete with the Chinese Leviathan. I don't think they can do it, frankly.
Well, I mean, if Elon Musk is our chairman, Xi, things are not going to go well for the United States of America.
No, fine with me. Throw out the bums. The thing is, this nation is a country of it is a country of bums. And I'm sorry. It's time to let somebody else take the wheel. But you know what? I'm a patriot. And so that's the thing is that what I don't like is I really just truly do not understand this. I am not, I'm not a college professor. I'm not, a titan of industry. I'm a small businessman. I am a small businessman living in America.
A job creator.
No, technically I don't employ anybody, but
1099s. Don't look too close.
But I'm just a normal guy, and I do wonder. I'm like, well, wouldn't the world be a better place if we just cooperated with our Chinese friends? And it seems to me that should be
and dealt with the climate crisis, maybe, and just really came together to solve the existential threat facing humanity instead of organizing our entire society and economy and politics towards civilizational war with China.
Yeah, exactly. I like the Chinese civilization. I think they're cool. And they were a very young country. You read about this thing. They only started in 1949. It's like, that's younger than my
coming
father.
Up on like 100 years pretty soon.
Exactly. And, it's just, I just think that there's a lot of common ground there. And I think it's disgraceful that American leadership seems intent upon spitting on it.
Yeah, I think I also want to say just real quick that like part of what we can kind of determine about the end game of the doggy brigade, what did Cory Doctorow called them broccoli hair brown shirts or something. I just love saying broccoli hair because I didn't know that was such a term that everyone was using, but now I can't unsee it. Everywhere I go, I just see boys with broccoli hair. It's crazy.
Where the hell are you going?
I live in a college town, so there's a lot of broccoli hairs here.
Arizona State.
Yeah, Arizona State. But so, it's kind of like, well, what is doggy? What are all these people doing? Like, what is the goal here? And I think that like AI seems to kind of be the looming above the doggy project a little bit, right? Like I think there's a reason why, not just for like legal ease, they sort of hijacked the Obama era, what was it called, like the USDS or whatever it was called, the digital service, to make it doggy. I think that they really are trying to kind of quote unquote update or get federal systems ready for an update, which is going to mean implementing, and they've said this, but I think that we don't understand fully what they have in mind or the scale they have in mind, but to implement a lot of AI tools into like governance structures, whether that's payment systems, whether that's just as sort of agents that are replacing certain levels of the bureaucracy, that are kind of making decisions, I guess, based on, I don't know, yes or no. Like it's, I guess they have such a disdain for bureaucrats. They probably think that a robot could do it or whatever. They're robots in general. I don't know. But I do think that is the project, which is, so it's a lean government, but it will be a very I think a lot of decision making is going to be not just more opaque by nature because it will be being done by a computer program, but also like that will actually be taking, I think that they are going to try to implement a lot of that stuff in places that we maybe are not kind of seeing or prepared for.
Yeah, I sent you guys this this notice that was sent out by a provost, I think, at Ohio State University to professors instructing everyone, and I think it was to like professors in the arts and sciences, that they needed to make sure all undergraduates were AI ready or something along those lines. And AI is just so important in terms of this lifeline to tech, to juice another huge cycle of investment for the sector after Web3 crashed and burned. And this has been so central to the sort of like political convergence of tech around Trump. He presided over the announcement of this OpenAI SoftBank $500 billion joint venture to build data centers. Abu Dhabi's state fund for AI,
Thank
it's called
God.
MGX, is involved. NVIDIA is involved, Microsoft. Separately, the chair of a Dubai-based real estate developer called Damak, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, joined Trump at Mar-a-Lago to announce a separate minimum $20 billion investment in American data centers. But then China's DeepSeek suddenly caught up with all these American tech companies that had been spending ungodly sums building bigger and bigger data centers and claiming that we needed to build more and more and more data centers to do whatever it is that they want AI to do, because the use cases still aren't like clear to me, aside from helping children cheat at their homework. But DeepSeek catches up very suddenly at a tiny fraction of the cost. And just the other day, I think you sent this to me, Brace, just the other day, it was reported that Microsoft was pulling back on data center leases. Is AI the next Web3? Are we looking at an AI impossible, broader tech bubble going bust? And does some of that explain, and I think we've kind of like hinted towards that, does some of that explain this really aggressive move into far-right politics from Silicon Valley?
I think that there's one thing to always be cautious of, which is the people who constantly hype up their own industry and product, because very obviously they will get more money the more investment goes into it and the more that the public buys into it, are probably somewhat exaggerating the society-altering effects of their product. But I do think that there's something that AI has that crypto and Web3 did not have, which is any sort of plausible use case. I think that the big difference here, I think the way a lot of sort of lay people got onboarded onto maybe tech outside of the general bubble of like Netflix or whatever website, or realistically probably Pornhub and whatever fucking scam bank account thing that they had somewhere, it has been through crypto, which is basically gambling
and money laundering.
money laundering, gambling, stealing, buying drugs or whatever.
Paying for other crimes.
Yeah.
Black market arms trade.
Exactly. Bribery. Like we've had crypto for a number of years, and there has so far been zero things that has helped with ever, except for causing a lot of people a lot of misery and embarrassing most celebrities, including, by the way, Larry David, because he got away with being...
He shouldn't get away with it.
He should have been canceled for that.
He was in the ad. I'm sorry. Like, he was playing himself in the ad. He was in the fucking ad.
Everyone's always like, oh, but Larry David doesn't know. It's like, Larry David knows.
He knows. He knows.
That's like saying Javier Milei doesn't know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's like,
They all know.
But it was a society-wide scam, and they should be fucking grateful because they got off easy. Every single one of these motherfuckers should be in prison. Sam Bankman-Fried literally should get either released or more people should go in. I'm, of course, in favor of the latter because I think that would improve society. I'm a law and order guy. But, crypto it still exists, but I think a lot of people realize that, like, it's mostly just for gambling now. Web3 was like a fake concept that, like, some PR guy invented that lasted for 2 months. But really, all of these people pivoted to AI, and specifically, I think, into making, like, flash in the pan wrappers for ChatGPT that they would sell to people in the App Store before they got shut down for whatever copyright violations. But I think that AI does have some use cases that we see now, I think will be employed more and more, even though it will probably, I'm sure it will improve, but like the quality will be shitty, but the quality of everything is fucking shitty now. So I don't even know if it will really stand out. I think that there is hype around it. I think there's a lot of bullshit around it. I think that there's a lot of hucksters who are trying to sell these fantastic dreams because, Peter Thiel's fixation on flying cars notwithstanding, there is this real need for a lot of people in the tech sphere to basically sell the future and sell an immediacy of the future to the rubes, essentially. And I think that AI is a really great opportunity for that because you can say it'll change everything. But in a way, they're actually correct because I think that technology in total or whatever, or what has led to AI and what AI kind of, I think, represents in some spiritual way, has been like a total transformation of society that's like akin to the Industrial Revolution and the upheavals alongside that. However, there just isn't really, and unlike the Industrial Revolution, there is no class-based formations that arise to contest power, at least so far. But I do think that AI there's a lot of bullshit there, and I think that we're going to have some bubbles pop and some dreams maybe not come true. But I do think that there is something there. And even if there isn't, I think now that they have the ability to lie on such a extraordinary, massive scale, that the truth and the fiction will be sort of intertwined in this stew that will be completely inscrutable to most people. And you know what? The other fucked up thing too is I think a lot of regular people treat AI like it's magic, like in a very literal sense, and they believe in the magic. And kind of like I was saying earlier, people asking Grok for the answer to something and treat it like a neutral arbiter, or people falling for the Facebook pictures or whatever. I think it's going to flood the zone with so much shit that people's already tenuous grasp on reality and in fact their own sanity will snap. And I kind of view AI, not to sound like Nick Land, but then again, I'm not a fucking, racist tweaker or whatever. I think he was probably a tweaker until he became racist, which is usually I kind of how I think the lineage of that goes. But I think the only comparable thing to AI or to all of this that AI represents is kind of like an eldritch being that like comes and glimpsing it or spending too long inside of it drives you to madness that you yourself can't even recognize because everybody else around you is so fucking insane too that there is actually no concept of madness anymore because everybody is nuts. So like, it's enlarging the lunatic asylum to be almost planet wide. And I think that AI, whether it helps do anything, like they always say that it's going to solve cancer, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. Well, then why don't you solve one thing first? Then maybe it can solve cancer. I'll give you a little more credence there. But I think that like you shared with me the other day that video of Peter Thiel talking about the Antichrist, and actually I watched his horrible, stuttering, veiny, sweaty, 2-hour long talk on it. And
he's always so sweaty.
so sweaty. And you know what it is, Liz? It's the speed. All these people are
It is
tweaked
right?
to the fucking gills. It is. No, it fully is. I believe me. But I watched that and I was like, okay, well, he's saying that the Antichrist is essentially going to be the person who says, I want to come along and stop all of this because this is apocalyptic. And what a brilliant thing for a guy like that to say, because really it's very convenient because the world does need somebody to stand up and say, this is crazy. This is driving everyone insane. This is going to lead to something really, really nasty. Apocalypse, whether it is a physical, real apocalypse that involves nuclear bombs, or whether it is a mental, intellectual, spiritual, and social apocalypse and political apocalypse, which I think is a little more realistic, or at least in the nearer term, people do need to stand up and say that. But it's got people, this horrible being has got people, there's possibly this Antichrist-like figure of technology, which is, I'm being, metaphorical here, but an amalgamation of all these different social trends and these companies and these political trends and these technologies that have kind of burst onto the scene alongside of each other, but also through each other, like this horrible, endless, sort of, I don't know what you would call it, this process of birth and babies giving birth to more babies and giving birth to more babies, a copy of a copy of a copy until you see something that's so nasty and deranged that even glimpsing it drives you nuts. I think that's what Thiel would like to bring into the world.
We need an Antichrist. We need someone to stand athwart history and yell, stop.
Well, Dan, I mean, you're a politics guy. I mean, is there anybody who's advancing like, hey, this is, you gotta be, what's going on?
What's going on with the politics?
Let me ask you a question.
I feel like it's fairly bleak right now, but I'm also sort of a relentless optimist, at least of the will. And I do try to look for the silver linings in the fact that even though what we're seeing now is an ascendant far right taking over pretty much everywhere, minus Mexico, Presidenta Scheinbaum, and a few other places.
And so far Brazil. But it's a little dicier there. Whereas the Morena Project is like hegemonic in an interesting way. And they're kind of in the toughest situation, being, as the late dictator Porfirio Diaz apocryphally said, so close to the United States and so far from God. So I take some hope here and there, and I do take hope, even though it's not what we had all hoped for, from the very uneven, very limited decade and a half revival of the American left that we've been living through, full of defeats and frustrations. But having come of age as a leftist in high school in the late 90s in the anti-globalization era, this like very exciting moment that was then just like squashed by 9/11 and the war on terror, and coming of age on the American left at a moment when being on the left meant basically righteously consigning yourself to a position of moral outrage and condemnation from the sidelines, that I'm still kind of like jazzed by the very idea that there's a left in the United States that's thinking about power at all. Because that's not we were consigned to oblivion when I first got involved. I mean, I genuinely I know, I feel like I'm doing the terrible Stringer Bell meme of like, oh, real Jews, sit back and watch, or, whatever. But I genuinely do sort of, I know that everyone was goofing on, what was it, James Carville? I think he was in the New York Times or something. He was like, Democrats just need to sit back and watch the show. But I kind of do think that. I mean, I think that, not speaking about, or I should say, Democrats are going to do what the Democrats do, but I genuinely don't know what's happening here. I don't think anyone does, and it's there are clearly points where other people and organizations can get involved legally at different points in the pipeline, try to stop some of the memorandums and the decisions and some of those things. And that's a very important angle to hit. That was always going to be hit or whatever, right? But I also am what these guys are doing is so unprecedented that I don't even know what the reaction is supposed to be. And the last thing that I could think of that would be good, effective, or cathartic, really, at the end of the line, would just be disorganized, screaming You know what I mean? Like, even though like I do understand that impulse, and I think that like people want that or want to see that, I do think that the more careful people can be, especially in an information environment that is like extremely hostile, right? Like the game has just totally changed on Twitter, in all of these papers, that in all of the sort of like old guard left liberal institutions, aka the media and the cultural institutions and academia, let alone, you know, how sidelined the labor unions are, right? Like that there's just like not, it's not clear to me what would make sense and what wouldn't be kind of like turned against a lot of people in ways that they couldn't anticipate, if that makes sense.
It does.
I very much share the uncertainty, and that's where I kind of get some, I guess, optimism from the intellect to add to my optimism of the will, which is just that when people are so black-pilled that they're like, everything is bleak forever, it's like, motherfucker, the one thing we know for sure is that none of us have any clue what anything's going to look like in a year or two.
Yeah.
Where's the certainty that everything's going to be awful forever? I mean, I know we've been taking a lot of L's recently, so there's no reason to think that, but I just really don't know. And in the meantime, I do think it's useful to have Zoran Mamdani out there like putting out a socialist program, and now he's in second place behind Cuomo in the polls. I'm not saying don't be depressed and upset. I'm depressed and upset every day, but also just like keep doing those things.
I never get depressed and upset. I'm always rocking, and I think the reality is something that I have said this on our show a bunch of times. I'm jealous of these doggy motherfuckers, because the reality is I know that if Bernie won, he wouldn't have brought in teams of psychotic, whatever Maoists in there and been like, "You're fired, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired. We're shutting down the Pentagon. You're fired. We're sending you to prison. You're doing that." That wouldn't have happened, and I think that like that wouldn't have happened because of whatever.
It would have looked a lot like the Biden admin, I think.
I think it would have.
The staffing would have, at least.
I think you're correct.
Would have been hyper cautious and sensitive to the dangers of the reaction against any excess left-wing extremism.
And the reality is we know now you can just unglue yourself. I mean, some of us have been knowing this the whole time, but now I think we've demonstrated materially you can just do things. You can just do things, and that's the reality. Is you can just do things, and like there is a sort of aggressive approach that is taken by many on the right that I think it would behoove many on the left to kind of. Maybe take some notes from, because you know what? You can just rock on.
Ignore the parliamentarian.
Ignore the parliamentarian. You know what? Fuck it. If you have the power, arrest the parliamentarian. I'm not kidding. Like it doesn't, none of this shit matters. And that's something that I think people a lot need to learn. None of this shit matters. And all this shit, by the way, I'm talking about is liberal, and I'm, of course, a big adherent myself, a classic American patriot, but liberal democracy does not matter. And I think a lot of left-wing people, whether they rhetorically have made that break, that doesn't matter. They need to mentally make that break. Is that like, I mean, if you believe in it, you believe in it. Not my business. I'm of course a liberal Democrat, so I believe anyone can believe whatever they want. But the reality is, I think it's demonstrated to us by what's happening right now, is that if you truly believe in a socialist project where you want to win and win forever, then you really have to like extricate yourself from liberalism. And I don't mean in some in some sort of spiritual or personal way, which I actually do mean that as well. But I mean in a very real political way, because I think what's happening right now, and I understand this temptation, is a sort of defense of liberal institutions, of liberal democratic institutions, a reflexive defense against the right and their assault on these things. And of course, there are parts of liberal democratic institutions that I do support. But I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of defending essentially the U.S. government and the way that it conducts itself. And at the end of the day, what you become then is you become somebody your position is the position of social peace. And that's what you want to enforce is social peace, which is really, is furthering the rule above another section of the bourgeoisie. But let's talk about AI some more, because I want to talk about this motherfucker.
I'm Aziz Rana, and you're listening to The Dig, a great place for analysis about where we are, how we got here, and what can be done. It's my favorite podcast, and you can support it at patreon.com.
This episode of The Dig is brought to you by our listeners who support us at patreon.com and by Haymarket Books. The far right ascends around the globe amid war and wildfires. The coming period promises more and deeper crises, but also to ignite mass social movements with increasing frequency. It's a crucial time for the left to come together and build durable organizations, coalitions, and relationships. At this critical juncture, the Socialism Conference, July 3rd through 6th in Chicago, will be a vital gathering space for organizers and activists to sharpen analysis, hone strategy, and build community. Featured speakers at Socialism 2025 will include Boots Riley, Robin D.G. Kelly, Kim Tallbear, Dean Spade, Sarah Schulman, Kali Akuno, Loria Garcia Pena, Richard Seymour, Sophie Lewis, Jesse Hagopian, Eric Blanc, Misha Fraser Carroll, me, Daniel Denver, and many more. The Socialism Conference is brought to you by Haymarket Books in partnership with dozens of endorsing left-wing organizations and publications. Visit socialismconference.org to learn more and register by April 25th for the early bird discounted rate. Hope to see you there.
We hear all the time from the very people who are making AI, who are always insisting that we do everything to cover every surface area in this country with data centers so that we can have more and better AI. These are the same people, as far as I can tell, who are also warning us that AI is going to destroy humanity. And this is sort of true with tech across the board, that the people who built the technological society that we've had imposed upon us are also try to position themselves as the most vociferous critics of tech, of the only people who can save us from tech. There's J.D. Vance saying that Google is, quote, one of the most dangerous companies in the world. Blake Masters, another Peter Thiel acolyte, was recommending that people read Ted Kaczynski's manifesto. Anyhow, what is up with tech lords making critique of tech so central to their politics?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's like so many of these guys like think of themselves as like little philosopher kings.
Yeah.
And like, I just really think that you see this with Elon. I kind of feel like there's something sort of, not to bring it back to Elon, but very 16th or 17th century about Elon Musk, like where it feels like he like understands that like to become the king, you have to make yourself indispensable to the king. You know, like he himself is making him first he was the jester, and now he is like now he's the right-hand man, and soon he will like assume power or something. And so I think that there's like this part of the way that they gas each other up is by assuming these positions of like, and it's kind of built into this like rationalist thought experiment, logic tree that they all sort of subscribe to, which is like, well, if we go to this technology, does that not create this own problem? And so there's like this sort of like self-critique that's kind of built in, not in a very cool Maoist way, but in a like very annoying freshman dorm philosopher king way. That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, they also these guys want to be Oppenheimer. I'm sorry. Like, and who, by the way, sick of hearing about him. I don't get you made the atom bomb. Well, guess what? We don't even know the name of the guy who discovered fire, and that guy did way more for the world. But like, and Oppenheimer's all over the cart book. You know, they talk about yeah. Oh, wow. Liz, you don't gotta read this.
That.
Get Grok 3 to summarize it for you in 18 plus not safe for work mode. But it is dog shit. But you know, they talk about Oppenheimer. I think because like a lot of them want to be part of that. Like, you know what I mean? It's like their version of fantasizing about being like, you know, a paratrooper, or like it's a masculine way of doing science and making things.
Yeah, I have become death is cool for them.
I do kind of get it. Like, not in the sense that like I think that it's cool that people were building the atom bomb, or that the like race to do that was cool or whatever. But I do understand the allure of like getting with your homies and building something. Okay. And I think that there is like what they're after is something that they can't name, which is actually this sort of like psychological and like much deeper spiritual like satisfaction with the work they do, when it's just like they have to believe that what they're making is as important as the atom bomb. And like so much of the AI myth is built on that and continues to like need to be built on that so that it can continue to get investment, right? Because why else would all of these companies be throwing $400, $500, $600 billion or whatever it is at something that isn't going to secure American hegemony, aka like American capitalist hegemony, in the same way that the nuclear bomb did, you know?
I think it's really important that they view this as the nuclear bomb, because like it allows them to have this, this self-importance that they can kind of attach to the project, but like it also obfuscates that the reality is one of the main use cases even the top guys in this industry talk about is like AI girlfriends and solving the loneliness crisis that people in their same industry are partially responsible for, and certainly people who have accelerated in crazy ways. And so yeah, and it's funny because a lot of what they want is really, when they talk about Oppenheimer, I think they want to be, first of all, I think they want a name that you can just say one part of, and people like know who that is. But also like they're seeking the quiet joys of brotherhood. You know, like they want to make things with other people, and aren't we all seeking that? But the only way they can figure out how to do it is by a giant government-funded project that will be immediately unleashed upon an unsuspecting population of civilians and cause untold, horrors and mutations for decades to come.
AKA Grok 3 18 plus.
Like, I'm sorry. Like, I don't want to. Yeah, like exactly, Liz. Like, I'm sorry. Like, it sucks that like I just don't understand it, because to me, like, the anarchy of the markets and the anarchy of frankly whatever they got going on down in Washington right now prevents us from doing real things that take care of our citizens, like genuinely arresting the people who made Grok 3 18 plus not safe for work. Voice mode, Liz. It can talk to you with its voice. Like, we should not. That's banned. I'm sorry. That's banned. We can't have things like that. But instead they inflict it upon us like a pox. It's frankly, these people in bed with our government just put a new plague out every couple of weeks and just say, let it spread.
Well, it's not just like an analogy, the, Oppenheimer nuclear bomb thing. There's this whole, we've been referencing it occasionally, this whole turn to defense tech. There's Palantir, there's Anduril, there's the whole Gundo scene in El Segundo near LA. And this is also the kind of like beating heart of the civilizational warfare, militarist, nationalist turn in tech. There's like an actual material substrate to it, which is that it's making tech money. And, when Peter Thiel says, we wanted flying cars, but we got Twitter instead, it's like, man, can we just have high-speed rail? But the only way that they can think of finally building something is things that are going to kill other people, which America is already very good at.
But it's like not even just that. I mean, it is that, absolutely. And I love the Gundo. I also love calling it the Gundo because I just think it sounds cooler. but people in California get mad at you when you say that. The Gundo.
The Gundo.
And it's important to note, because we talked so much about Elon, that like obviously SpaceX first headquarters were in El Segundo, and like SpaceX is kind of the model for this sort of what parts of the government can we privatize, right? Like Elon was able to, when he was able to get the SpaceX contract, it's now like he is responsible for all of the satellites for the US government. And like that's the deal with his contract. And that was like kind of a big major win for him. And all of these guys, at all of these sort of startups, hard tech startups and in the Gundo, a lot of them are ex-SpaceX engineers, as much as they are all part of this weird kind of ex-patriotic Anderson style, like build, baby, build, you can just do things, hard tech revolution social group that's very online, extremely online, and extremely concerned with the way that it's portrayed online. So it's kind of like a sort of mix of the two. Something to remember about AI, because I always find myself doing this, is that like Well, a couple things. You mentioned the train. I'm sorry, I want to go back to this because you mentioned the trains, and this kind of goes to some of the deeper problems with the American state that I was talking about, where it's not just that like we literally don't have the political capacity within our political system to get the money to invest in our country. Like
in a single high-speed rail line, zero. We have zero.
But just even look at something like the CHIPS Act, right? Which was already as contentious as it was. The three package, the
IRA, chips, infrastructure.
Yeah. But the money that they threw, highly touted, very, lauded in the press. Everyone, ooh, can't believe we got this. Finally, we're, putting all of this money behind semiconductor fabs in the US. And I think it's, like Adam Tooze rightly pointed out that he's like, this is like what other countries put forward in a quarter. Like, because these industries are so capex intensive, and the amount of money that is required to quite literally get the state up to speed in a real material way, in a way that we would see in our lives. And I don't mean throwing money at fucking semiconductor fabs, which is really just a sort of that's just a payoff to consumers, right? Because there's no you could maybe argue some strategic, but there's no real reason to do that, right? It's not like the train thing you're talking about. Or
I think you could argue strategic, like in terms of the Taiwan's.
Sure, but the size and of the subsidies required, and the time and the commitment, and getting the engineers and the education and there's so many fucking steps there that we do not have the political will. We of course have the fiscal will. We have the fiscal capacity. We have all of the only limits on us doing this stuff are political, right? But those are very real limits and are sort of hard limited by the political system as much as they are by the political imagination, right? And so you see all of these guys touting this build baby build kind of meme ideology, the Androcenes, we're flying the American flag in El Segundo, we're this brand new American renaissance of manufacturing that is also extremely revanchist, right, in a lot of ways. To me, I just laugh because I'm like, okay, maybe all that's left is for you to get the SpaceX contract. All that's left is for you to continue to latch on to the state and get that. I think they know that. But there is actually, unless major political revolutions happen that obviously the right wing is not interested or capable of doing, and because that's not what they want to do, those things are never going to come into fruition. Like the real intensive actual upgrading of the American system. It's so beyond the pale of even what was unacceptable from the Biden administration. I fall into this, which is I only think about the consumer facing stuff, which is the groks and the slop, which we should talk about, and the just the bullshit art and the I fall for the AI. I thought the Pope in the puffy jacket was real.
Oh,
it's such a good image.
No, I'm sorry. I'm stopping you right there. You can continue in 1 second, but I gotta say, Liz really did think the Pope was wearing a big ass fancy
I was
puffer. She did. She was like, "Is this real?"
I did think that was.
That is fake. Baby Jesus in a kafia.
I know.
Real.
I know.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But so that's obviously one side, and I think that there's a huge bubble there. Hopefully, although I do think that there's a lot of unexplored opportunity in ad tech, unfortunately, for everyone in America.
Oh God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bleak.
Liz, speaking of ad tech, though, I want to say to the New York listeners, I don't know when this episode comes out, but the fucking Skechers AI generated ad that's in every subway station drives me insane. There's nothing to do with what you're talking about. Please continue.
Wait, what is it?
I'll send you a picture. I'll send you a picture tonight. It's crazy.
Okay.
Please loop me in.
No, but on the other side of this is I was thinking about this when, Trump, one of his first executive orders was relaxing basically any and all protections around oil and gas exploration and extraction. And as we've kind of started whatever it is we want to say the American energy transition is, I'm putting that in quotes because our listeners can't see that, right? Which is really more of a kind of layering on of other sorts of energy products to oil and gas rather than transitioning
All of the above.
off of. Yeah. And so creating kind of a tranche, that can also be, traded, fun enough, as a kind of financial product. Setting that aside though, but like, the oil and gas sector is one of the most computational intensive and big data reliant industries in the world. And as it becomes more and more difficult to extract, particularly, I'm really thinking about gas here especially, but both, because it requires ever more precise tools, whether that's in within engineering or within geolocating or in,
beginning with exploration and then
totally
all the way through.
Yeah, all the way through the pipeline, no pun intended, that it creates like critical new use cases for big data centers and big data computational systems and cloud computing and basically IT industry boondoggles, right?
Which are then themselves energy hungry.
Exactly. And they require, yes, that's the flip side, right? That data centers themselves create then a surge in demand for electricity that is basically without precedent. And so when we think about the success of the American AI push, it's not just, in the kind of fantasies of Sam Altman and all of these like fucking freaks that have their own sort of God complexes, philosopher king complexes or whatever, right? But also with the fundament of the global capitalist system itself, the sticky, toxic, liquid gold that undergirds the entire world system, right? Which is...
The spike in energy demand is a virtue.
Exactly. So part of this is that like a lot of the great hope about AI from the biggest sectors in capitalist industry is that it will create new demand. Because we are in the crisis of capitalism is a crisis of demand. Profits decrease, investment decreases, and so on and so forth. And you get a crisis. And the AI moonshot, the hope is that as it will open up new room for more electricity demand, for more oil demand, as it requires more and more power to power this thing, right? So you can see already how it's this fucking machine with so many layers that, a lot of people are invested in on a lot of different angles that I think you got to kind of step back a bit to appreciate.
Planetary suicide Keynesianism. Bleak.
Yeah.
I want to show you guys something that has driven me insane every time I've taken the subway. So every day for I don't know how long, but it feels like it's been up for like a year. It's a Skechers ad, and it's a Skechers ad that is in so many different subway stations. And I think it's really indicative of like the way that a lot of things are going right now, because it is, I texted it to you guys, it is an ad that has nothing to do with the product being sold, which is some kind of Skechers shoe. It is like almost it is a stock AI image that they seemingly purchased.
Oh, the second image. What the fuck?
It's crazy. I mean, and every time I walk by it, which again is almost every day, like I stop and stare at it, because to me it's like the process and the people that this had to get into to get to this very expensive seeming, physical ad campaign had to be quite extensive process itself, right? And nobody was like, hey, how come that guy's face is like a horrible nightmare image of like many things imploding on each other? Or like, how come these women's bodies are like fucked up? One woman has like sharp feet and the other woman has these weird sort of non-feet, especially for a shoe ad. How come there's no Skechers in there? It's like a picture of, a drawing of two women on seemingly like a French high street. And I realized like people just don't care, I guess. Like it's just like nothing. I mean, it's again like the breakdown of society, but like it's just, this shit is just like okay to put out there. And I think that there was a sort of pushback against a lot of AI stuff. And I think you still see it from certain sections of consumers, a pushback against it. But now I think AI has occupied the same place for a lot of people as like the rest of just the shit that they consume every day, which is something that's vaguely comforting, that is dulling to the senses, and that most of all prevents you from thinking about anything outside of it. I sound like one of those 90s anti-TV kind of people, but I really do think that like the purpose of a lot of things that we ingest on the internet are actually like, you know, not saying it's like a top down, they're purposely deployed this way, although of course never ruling that out, but really like the individual like meaning that we get out of them is to prevent us from thinking, because if you start thinking, you know, about anything, even idle thoughts, bored thoughts, it could lead to all kinds of disasters. So they have this sort of soporific effect, and I think that the Skechers ad is so jarring to me because it exists outside of the context in which you usually see those things. I mean, I see it while walking the train station. You know, my funky ass is always on alert in case I see someone I need to push into the tracks. And it's so jarring to me. And yeah, it's shit. It seems like it's shit that has escaped the confines of the septic tank, which, you know, the internet. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that leakage.
It's so crazy.
Prepping for this, I was thinking of two things. One, I just sent you this image from Providence Place Mall near my house where they did AI Black History Month art, infuriating some local Black people and artists.
It's kind of funny how Soviet looking it looks, though, right? Doesn't it have a kind of Soviet realism angle, but like through...
It does.
Unfortunately, like through Stable Diffusion.
It does, yeah, and a quasi-religious tone.
Yes,
too. The Malcolm X one is baffling. Where is he supposed to be in this?
The last one is scary. It's like, what is that kid looking at?
It's Lynchian.
Yeah, but I was thinking about the Benjamin line that, quote, "The logical outcome of fascism is an aestheticization of political life," and what he meant by that is that art in its age of mechanical reproduction, that it can allow for this aesthetic transformation of society that leaves actual capitalist relations of production untouched. And I'm not sure about the order of operations. He's saying that the fascism is creating the art, but there does seem to be some relationship between, like you were suggesting, in this sense where nothing seems possible, that very weird sorts of fantasies are playing themselves out in these aesthetics. Is there something particular to the very type of aesthetic it is? The kind of random, the juxtaposition of things that make no sense next to each other, the bored apes.
Oh, I love the apes.
And this isn't AI art, but relatedly, like why the Cybertruck looks like that. I mean, it's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. It seems to be like the product of someone who saw RoboCop but thought it was a utopia.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, listen, I'm no art critic, you know, but I've critiqued a lot of art. And I got to tell you, the AI shit that you see, like these mishmashes of very like, I mean, there's a certain... Again, I don't know enough about art to even describe it, I think, accurately, but if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. Like, there's a certain look that almost all this stuff naturally has. Like, if you, because I've done a a number of AI art pieces using Grok's native AI, particularly spent a long time trying to get a cartoon of Elon Musk being milked around the time that his latest baby was leaked. By the way, that I have doxed that baby. I just want to be clear. I'm not gonna say the name on the show, but I know the baby's doxed. But I
the baby's dog.
There's a certain
Gotta
look.
dox the baby.
I dox the baby.
All babies, no baby undoxed.
No baby. We leave no baby undoxed. But there's a certain look to this stuff that I think does reflect like the unreality of like a lot of online life now, and I think especially like the huge glut of seemingly like bot accounts or AI run accounts, especially on Twitter, because now there's this thing on Twitter where if you have a blue check, you can get paid for engagements with other blue checks. And so the reply to every single tweet is a bunch of blue checks, like clearly AI generated tweets, asking questions that will be answered by other blue checks, likely also AI generated accounts, that will like create some money and value and not value, but money will be made, probably to the tune of a few cents. And I think that like, to me, there's a perfect artistic through line from that being sort of the literature of the age, to the AI art, that weird unreal sheen that's given to a lot of these things. And I think there is a kind of comfort in it. And it is sort of, all the talk that these people have of the Matrix or getting out of the Matrix or whatever, like they have actually started creating the very real Matrix that they want you to spend all of your time in.
It was like Joe Rogan praising Severance the other day.
I know. I mean, I haven't seen Severance, but it doesn't matter. So what? Of course he can. He can believe anything. Like, that's the thing, is Rogan could believe every single thing that he says, and they could be diametrically opposed from each other, because everyone can do that now. It doesn't matter. And it does put the honest man at a severe disadvantage. But we've been like that since time began. Not that I'm honest, but I think that the art is just, it's baffling to me. And I think its acceptance among large sectors of society, and the hurry in which all of these movie studios and production companies have taken to integrate it into their art. And also the way that people talk about into their art, into their fucking stupid bullshit TV shows that would be illegal in a just world. But the thing that I hate the most about it is, like, when you hear people kind of complaining about it, and then you see like the backlash that they get from that, it really is just like part of this general I don't know what it is, like anti-humanities trend among like large sections of the population who are sort of half tuned in to like Musk world. And I think that sort of thing will grow and grow and grow, because I think in a strange sort of way, people worship the AI. And I think people do find the AI art beautiful, because I think that the technological, the effects that technology have had on a lot of people's brains have malformed them to such a degree that like they are able to see beauty in that. It's almost in the same way that like some animals can see, different spectrums of light than we can see. I think the person who has fully enmeshed themselves into this kind of new slop world actually is able to perceive a beauty in this AI art that like the human being, the fully human being, can't. And I think that, and forgive me for getting a little out there, I think that's like a lot of people almost, they might be really afraid of AI, or they might really welcome AI, because deep down they know that there isn't really that big of a difference between AI and themselves, except for now the only advantage they have over the AI is the ability to consume. But once the AI is able to get jobs, maybe that'll even make them obsolete. And so I think a lot of people view in every turgid or bullshit or broken or cliche riddled AI sentence that they read, view an image of their own obsolescence. I don't even know how to pronounce that. And it makes me sad.
And fantasize about their own obsolescence.
Yes.
And
that's probably a way to try to control it. That's what all fantasies are. Everyone seems to not understand the kind of use of fantasy, but I do think that in that instance, it's like a way of, you fantasize to play something out, to take control, to be the one in control of the situation, because you aren't when it actually plays out, right? You have to passively take it. But what you said about people kind of embracing the slop, and kind of Joe Wiesenthal from Bloomberg was kind of tweeting about this today. I saw it was funny because he's been doing all these like AI experiments himself. I think he's been trying to like learn how to code or whatever, and has come out of it really critical. But he said something like, he was like, what is going to happen when all of knowledge is replaced by this stuff, which is making up, it's hallucinating, right? There's like all of these instances of hallucination, and it's just like making up facts or whatever, and making up quotes to like buttress its answer to your prompt or whatever, right? And he showed all these examples of him. I don't know what model he was using. I kind of can't keep up with all of the ins and outs of all of these, all the different models and all of the different whatever, but all of the replies to him, and it's like, I don't think they were all bots. There some of it was, but some of it's people. But in the final analysis, what's the difference, right?
Yeah, what's the difference?
Yeah, what's the difference? We're basically saying, Brace, what you're saying about this hatred of humanity. So they're like, well, that's what academics do all the time. They just make things up, and it's like. Yeah. And Wiesenthal's like, no, they don't. Like, you might think that a lot of people in academia, and you're not wrong, produce or study or are the product of a lot of nonsense. Okay, sure. You're not going to get an argument from me, frankly. But to say that they're just making things up whole cloth in the same way that AI is, possibly even what they're making is a moral argument, right? That it's morally justified for AI to replace all of this stuff because of the decadence of the American higher education system or whatever, but particularly within the humanities, in the social sciences or in the gender studies department usually is where these people have this, idea, right?
Grievance studies.
Totally. But it was kind of shocking to read because it was like, again, I know that some of the people replying were not. They were like Silicon Valley AI people, it's the fucking editor of Bloomberg, right? And they were kind of honestly coming to the defense of this stuff, saying like, no, this will replace. And he was saying like, what happens when literally like the halls of Alexandria basically are replaced by slop? And then that becomes the accepted knowledge of the world. Like, I think on a epistemological level, this is really fucking heavy to think about. And despite what Sam Altman says about like, this is the time to have democratic debate or whatever. I mean, I don't think he uses the word democratic, but he's like, this is the time to have debate about the structure of society. It's like, bitch, as if we ever get to debate the structure of society. The structure of society, by the way, is always up for contestation. You just need to invite yourself, right? But like, there is no, it's not just in this one moment when four people are thinking that this like computer system could remake all of human knowledge to be just to think about, I get like romantic and what I guess would typically be a conservative point, but I think that makes sense when you see the right. The right is revolutionary at the moment, and it's put me in a conservative position.
I think the same thing. Yeah.
Like books are nice. It's nice to read books, and it's cliche and simplistic, but it's not. I think it's important that these people have built a technological infrastructure that's making everyone functionally illiterate.
Yes,
it is important, and it's also like, I can't believe that we are still having to sort of defend the use of literature. Like, are you out of your fucking mind? First of all, you're a fucking moron, and this shouldn't even be a conversation. And it just makes me so angry that we live in such an illiterate, unsophisticated society with like that this is like an argument that needs to be had every like 3 years. It's absurd. It's just absolutely absurd. And it makes me like go totally like snobby European mode of like, we have no actual like culture in this fucking country.
Well, I do want to talk more about how trashy these people are. I mean, a 26-year-old.
Oh my God.
A 26-year-old conservative influencer who wrote a book, an anti-trans children's book.
Dad.
Elephants Are Not Birds. Yeah. So what is like, is this just like positive eugenics? What's going like
Musk?
Why? He, like 13 kids that we know of, probably far more, because obviously he's trying to keep them
off
secret,
the record.
Like a good chunk from IVF. Like what's the thing here? I mean, there's long-standing Christian conservative natalist politics, the really ickily named Quiverful movement being one of the big ones.
The bountiful nut.
And also the Zionist one, There's a lot of different religious ones, yeah.
Yeah, but is this like the same, Musk said he wants to do his, quote, best to help the underpopulation crisis because, quote, a collapsing birth rate is the biggest danger civilization faces by far. His father, Errol Musk, and some listeners have not heard this, I'm sure, and they need to know. His father, Errol Musk, who Elon has in the past described as evil, he has at least 7 kids, including 2 that he had with his own stepdaughter.
Woody Allen style, yes.
I mean, it's really disgusting. But is this just the same as, is this just the evangelical shit? But like so much of Trumpism, just stripped of its moral pretension and just it's exposing the raw will to domination.
I mean, I genuinely think yes, because the funny thing is so many of the stereotypes about big religious figures, Falwells, etc., are just true. I'm sorry, they're true.
They're all sickos.
These people are sickos in ways that like the most degenerated, Bushwick polycule could not even dream of. Like it is, I mean, Falwell, what's it, Jerry Falwell Jr. with his fucking little thingy hanging out of his pants on the boat with his fucking polycule wife and shit. I mean, sorry, it's just like, but the thing is, like, I mean, this really goes back to the issue of hypocrisy, and that was sort of like the minor Achilles heel to the evangelical movement, to the Christian right, is that like so many of their major figures were just the most naked hypocrites.
Like when Ted Haggard got caught, they don't care anymore.
Exactly, right? But now we're almost in this era of ultimate freedom where like you are free to profess as many of like the most, trad whatever opinions as you can, and at the same time, in even the same breath, do something that is just completely 180 degrees opposite from that, and it will not even make a dent. I mean, when Elon's latest paramour announced the birth of their child Romulus together.
Wait, did you just dox the baby?
Well, I'm not saying. I'm saying that many have said that might be the name. But when that baby was announced, the replies to that tweet were all full of the Candace Owens, all these people who are full of papists and perverts alike, but all congratulating her on the birth of her child. And it doesn't matter. Like nothing matters. And that's the thing. Is like they can now there is almost a freedom in being able to be hypocritical. And when someone calls you out on it, which is a waste of time for the most part, you can just say, "Oh, cry more, lib," or like you're at least that we're not trying to trans the kid, lib, or like something like that. It just becomes it's as bereft of meaning or significance or anything as everything else that these people do. They really are. I hate to say it, but like some of these people are just scum. And I'm not saying they couldn't be redeemed. I think that they could. I think that several years of and I'm not even joking here, like real labor and getting to know the earth and like and being able to like sort of reconstitute themselves on a very basic level would make productive members of society out of a lot of these people who I think are just plainly sick. But that's not the case now, and I think that there is these people, Teal and the like, will kind of fall back on religion as a way to kind of signify far right beliefs, or not even far right necessarily, but like right wing beliefs. But the reality is, did they believe in them? No, they don't. And there is a eugenic part of this. They are obsessed with this like eugenic idea on some level, but on another level, like a lot of these people are just fucking horny.
Mm-hmm. But I was just thinking out loud. Now I have a question for you guys. What is the role of the Christian right now in the Republican or right-wing coalition? Just like thinking about it, because I feel like after they won the fight on abortion, and then with Trump's reelection, like his pastor, if it was like a Bitcoin like guy, like it wasn't the kind of like moral majority that kind of lasted through the Bush admin up through to the Tea Party, I mean, and beyond, right? But like that feels long gone to me, or maybe just sidelined. Like, I don't know what you guys think. I just thinking about this, that like the Christian right, it's like the evangelicals, they have the sort of end of days Zionist project that they're aligned with at the moment, but also that feels like even a more crazier strain than some of even the Falwell stuff that we used to see in some way. Does that make sense? And so it's like this other extreme radical version that we've seen that is within the coalition of the right. Because MAGA is like really, they're Christian kind of, but also in this like, no, they're not, it's like Christy Nome,
They're swingers.
I interviewed this progressive evangelical scholar named Kristen Dumais. I don't know if have you heard of her book? It's called Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. It's a very good book because it basically just made the argument that I just stole when I was talking about, Elon's natalism being the same as the Christian right natalism, stripped of any moral pretensions. She basically documents that these people are entirely theologically illiterate. It's just sort of white evangelical is like their ethno-national group that they want to be dominant, and they want men and powerful men to exercise kind of like raw domination within it. So there's no reconciling their purported morality to Trump's brazen immorality. And it's not just this like, oh, Trump is the Samson, the immoral guy from the Bible who hooks up the believers because he's a tool of God. It's not that. It's Trump is exactly what they believe at this point. And, it's that plus, I think there'll be some push for a national abortion ban, even if Trump himself thinks that's a horrible idea. Like they might push really hard for it. And all currents of the right seem to converge powerfully around trans stuff, which is also, just gender stuff, which is also about just, as Zuckerberg would put it, bringing the masculine energy back in, raw domination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the evangelical kind of vitalist obsession, I think you're totally right. Thinking about, obviously, in South America, it is such a force, Africa as well, but it's been kind of amazing, not amazing, but, wild to watch the sort of how the evangelical movement has changed politics in South America so quickly. Also, technology has aided that a lot. WhatsApp and Twitter and everything. It's like a whole beast.
And all these prosperity gospel ministers flying private airplanes around.
Yeah. And Mormonism I got to mention Mormonism. Shout out Mormonism here on that too, because those guys, with all the funky shit they got going on in Mexico and everything, they're just kind of all over a lot of this stuff. But yeah, no, that's a good point.
The thing is, one feels pity for the God-fearing Christian, because it seems so much more lucrative to be one of the non-God-fearing Christians that just kind of uses Christianity as either an ethnocentric kind of glue to bind your community together, or frankly as a way to get rich. One does wonder. I think there was some concern in the MAGA camp around abortion kind of fucking up their chances. I think there was some probably unearned triumphalism among liberals about how, this is going to sink MAGA.
Because there were some elections like Kansas, that Kansas referendum. It was
I know, but I think that Trump will probably try to enforce his current his way that he weaseled out of it, which is nobody liked Roe v. Wade, and now we have something that everybody likes, which is we threw it back to the states. I think that he'll probably try to hold on to that. But who fucking knows? Maybe, and I think that maybe in the future when the birth rate stuff maybe becomes a bit even more mainstream, that especially if they really do clamp down heavy on immigration, we might see an anti-abortion thing led by, someone such as Matt Iglesias or someone for that, for purely nationalistic reasons to get our,
to get 1 billion Americans.
1 billion America. Can you imagine 1 billion Americans?
Sounds like a really bad idea.
The stench. Good God. They don't make enough beef in the world. There aren't enough cows to feed all those fucking pigs. It's crazy to me. Not that I love Americans, but I think we don't need 1 billion of them. Nobody thinks that.
Just one guy thinks that.
Just one guy thinks that.
Or thought. I think he's sort of now he's they're
still,
smart to be
his ass still thinks it, but he's just the branding was bad.
Pity the poor Iglesias. No? All of these guys.
I think he's doing pretty well.
I think he is too.
Also, but I'm wait a second. Matt Iglesias had a fucking direct line to, if not people in the administration, heavy operators in the administration, and a lot of people, or heavy operators that were aligned with the administration, and a lot of people there were reading what he was writing, and now he has tried to walk back so much of his influence because of he views the decisions made by the Biden administration on a variety of issues, but usually having to do with fiscal programs and expansion, to be indefensible at this point, which is absurd.
He's blaming it on the groups.
I still don't know what that means.
It means progressive liberal left non-profits who actually weren't
but
making.
I think he means the internet is the thing.
Yeah.
And then the Sunshine Group or whatever.
I think actually genuinely probably getting dogpiled on Twitter probably has more of an effect than Latinx Democrats for Change in the greater Houston metro area calling the representative and being blah, 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 blah. I think really I agree with that. The groups, my God, we need a better. Here's the deal, Matt. It's just you're somebody who's you're destined for, I think you would be happier hundreds of feet underground, just getting some shit out of the fucking side of a mountain with a damn pickaxe and putting it on a fucking little cart that goes up to the surface. I think you would find that to be a much more simple life. But I do pity him, and I do pity a lot of these like sort of liberal types like him. I pity everybody. I'm a big-hearted individual because I think that like the reality has just left them in the dust, right? Like none of this shit fucking matters anymore, and I think that they don't understand that. And I think it would behoove many on the left to kind of get with the program and figure out a new program because I think a lot of the old rules have kind of gone out the window in the past 6-8 years without people noticing.
I have one more question I want to ask before I absolutely exhaust you all, though you two are some of the only people I know who have podcasts that are as long as mine. So I know
No, it's all good.
I know that your endurance is real.
Yeah, we're athletes.
The podcasters are the real athletes of 2025.
Yeah.
One,
that's what Playoff P says.
A question on aesthetics. There were so many questions that we didn't get to, but one that I must ask because I truly don't know the answer to it, which is just the way that these people dress. How would you describe Mark Zuckerberg's new wardrobe?
The thing is, I do think so. I'm old, and so I think that you can trace it back to something called health goth. Now, I don't want to say that it is health goth because it's not, but I do think that I associate that with a lot of kind of like LA bro tech adjacent hustlers, we'll say, who like you can tell that like Zuckerberg like really optimizes his body. Like he is on the like longevity program, but then he is also wearing like U-neck, oversized, thick as hell t-shirts with, kind of like, I don't think it's a drop crotch particularly, but there's some sort of like comfort, a relaxed sweatpant, a jogger that's happening underneath the oversized crew neck or U-neck really. And so it like, to me, it's a little Essence. It's a little hyphy. It's a little Bored Ape. And it's like also guy who has no personality.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough for me, because I operate on a level of almost obscene empathy, right? Like I am probably,
you're an empath.
I'm an empath, I'm a terminal empath. I just get it, but I just cannot fucking put myself in the shoes of an adult man who like has to like be sat down by a team and be like, we're about to put your ass in the heaviest t-shirts of all time from now. We got to fuck with your hair.
Have you seen Billie Eilish? Because we think you as a 40-year-old man should dress like her.
You're a white Billie Eilish now. Yes. It makes me sad because on one level, we're looking at, it's not uncommon for wealthy, public figures to have stylists, but to be styled to such a degree, I think to me, it's tough to square that with a person who controls so much communications infrastructure that it's almost tough to think about. I think that there's certain fashion trends that exist in Silicon Valley that, like Liz very astutely pointed out, I think many of them sort of descend from health goth. For me, I love Musk's, which is just a form-fitting tight black t-shirt, which fits a rather extraordinary form, if I do say so. I mean, really, almost an unprecedented form. Really, it's almost like he's got a couple extra organs in there.
What is in there?
He's
like a turducken.
I would love to do a vivisection, or at least be in the theater when it happens.
Right. Yeah.
Because I don't know
if you have the skills to actually perform the vivisection.
But yeah, I just open it and look in, I mean, there's only so many things you can put in there, right?
You need that also like AI documented Vermeer style.
Yeah. He does. That is actually true. In a similar way that like AI would invent fingers or like extra limbs for people, or maybe have a hand sticking out of another hand. It's almost as if Elon Musk had his body redesigned by an AI. And so it puts like a distended kidney in there, but then like another distended organ that doesn't exist. They give him a gizzard or something like that.
Yeah.
It's very strange. But the aesthetics of these people are atrocious. Difficult to look at. somehow have coincided with the use of the word aesthetic as it's used now, which is one of the few things, and it makes me sound like an old man. I hate the way
I
that
hate
people
it
use
so
the
much.
word
It makes me
aesthetic.
so mad. It makes me so
When
mad.
people
It's so
call
mad.
things aesthetic, it's like, what are you?
I'm like,
about?
you're using the word wrong. You're using the word
You're
wrong.
using the word wrong.
You've
Sorry,
turned
you're
it
using
into
the word wrong.
slop. You've
And
slopped
somebody
it.
use- I use a lot of words. It's the slopification of language. I think you're
You
right.
have. You've
and
slopped it.
This is the slopification of human being. I'm sorry, like you shouldn't be. If I'm ever there rocking in front of large crowds, and I'm a titan of industry, my ass is getting into something a little more dignified than exactly what Liz is saying, a bored ape outfit with a chain. I mean, Mark, you're too old to be start wearing a chain. I mean,
And you're too fucking rich. Like, that's the thing that is so crazy to me. And it's like all of those, like, the corny stereotypes from every single point in your life about the insecurity and the loneliness, failure, personal failure that these men feel when they look in the mirror, these like titans of industry or whatever. Like, I'm so reminded by like caricatures of like, there was like a character on Friends, even like Monica dated some billionaire that took up MMA fighting because he was so bored and couldn't figure out what else to do and had to prove that he was a man and not a nerd anymore. Like, it's just like such a long-standing trope. It's so tropish. The world is so slopified that we're now dealing with tropes everywhere. But like, it's like I look at Mark Zuckerberg and I'm like, his like based turn was so pathetic, and you could tell that everyone knew how transparent it was. Like, I think even like I was reading like Mike Solana like wrote something even to that effect, where he was like, yeah, we know that like it was done out of necessity, and it was like he kind of like debased himself in Trump 1 and didn't have the balls to kind of stand up to all of this stuff, but now he's turned a corner and we all kind of know where he's coming from. But like, whatever, at least he's on the team. Like, it was like so transparent. And then on top of that, you're dressing like a fucking podcaster, and not like us podcasters, like Theo Vaughn. Like, you are a grown man who is one of the richest men in the world,
like a passive income type podcast.
Yeah.
Yes, and you're like fucking trying to dress like streamers. It's pathetic.
Zuckerberg dresses like sort of the ultimate refined example of one of those like dropship guys, and like that's just the world we live in now. We live in the dropship world. We live in the slop world. We live in and I think to me it's like it's something I almost never used to have to think about my humanity or even like my relation to like literature or to anything. It was just like part of your life. It's something you did. You were just a human in the world. And now I think there is like a distinction between like something that's happening that's bad for people. And I think it's going to take a long time to figure out the effects. But there is a sick thing that's happening to people. And the people that are pushing it, I mean, might I remind you that like so much of this of the excesses of the woke era came from, at least to the average person, from these companies. Like, there was not a democratic input. Me and my friends didn't get like, we didn't write letters to fucking Facebook and tell them, do this, and this, and this, and this. Like, you were the arbiters of this stuff. And now you turn around as the aggrieved parties, and this was pushed on you. And like Liz said earlier, yeah, a lot of this stuff probably came from like middle management in these companies or like employees or whatever. But like, you still did it. And like, it is you are people who, if you didn't believe it all along, then you displayed an extraordinary weakness that like, if I had displayed something to that effect, I would not be able to go on any longer. But these people publicly were so weak and pathetic and debased, and to come back like roaring in with this masculine way. I mean, I'm sorry. To me, it reads it's disgusting to me, and I say that from frankly a almost a bigoted position. I am, whatever you want to call it. I am racist against whatever kind of people that these are. I love everybody, but like these people, these tech people, they do seem to me like they are less than human and slightly more than machine, and they're the melding of the two. They're cyborgs, and I don't like the cyborg. Like, it's like Liz said, I feel like almost like a conservative sometimes, because like, to me, I like to touch a real thing. I like to hold a real thing. I like to be with people, and I feel the only thing that makes me feel good in my life is being around other people and feeling the sort of the joy that you get from the company of people that you love. And these people, not only they don't feel that, they actually do. They maybe want that in some, residual part of their brain that's still human, but they do everything they can to destroy that. And I hate them for it.
Well, Musk in particular is so driven by bad feelings that he can't confront about people not liking him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think all these guys, I really do, except for the ones that move in silence, which are the ones to be afraid of.
Because that's a true player. Liz said that a long time ago. It's like a true G moves in silence, and I've always taken that as like, that is true. So you watch the quiet ones.
I mean, I'm a conservative. I believe in discretion. I find all of this behavior untoward. If the leader of my political movement was getting called out on a website for not texting back, not one, but two baby mamas to two different babies, which we shan't dox. It's like, it's also reality TV to me. And this is what I say, like, my advice to the youth that are listening as a grizzled old conservative is don't, resist the machine and operate like a true G in silence with discretion. You don't need to splay open every part of yourself for this machine of madness. You don't have to do it. And I think a lot of people are trying to kind of step back from this stuff, but Brace is right. Like, nothing good comes to this, and it warps your mind and it warps other parts of you. I think that it's worth conserving what we can before they take over the whole world.
Well, Brace Belden and Liz Franczak, thank you very, very much.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Brace Belden and Liz Franczak are the hosts of the TrueAnon podcast. Thank you for listening to The Dig from Jacobin Magazine. As Marx once said, after noting that the oligarchy does not perpetuate itself by retaining power permanently in the same hand, but by dropping it with one hand in order to catch it with the other, and so on. While other podcasts have only interpreted the world in various ways, our point is to change it. We're posting new episodes most weeks. The Dig was produced by Alex Lewis. Our associate producer is Jackson Roach. Music by Jeffrey Brodsky. Our operations manager is Sylvia Atwood. Our senior advisors are Thea Rio Francos and Ben Mabey. Check out our vast archives and newsletters at thedigradio.com. Follow us on Twitter and also Instagram at thedigradio. And do find us wherever you get podcasts and subscribe to this one. If it's on iTunes or Spotify, also leave us a nice rating and review. Those help introduce us to new listeners. But what really does that is you telling others to check out this pod. Please make propaganda for us. And do find us at patreon.com and make a monthly or annual contribution to keep this operation up and running strong. Even a few bucks is huge.